Hey guys, what is up? SuperKmanrocks here, and I'm here for my LPL Week 8 overview, analysis, and of course, at the end, my updated power rankings. Incredibly excited to go over Week 8 here in the LPL. We're really starting to get into the thick of things. Only 3 more weeks of the regular season remain. Remember, 10 weeks of regular season action here in the LPL, and that means that these teams, the difference between them, getting into the playoffs and not getting into the playoffs, a lot of the teams that are on the fringe are these series, the series that we're going to be covering in this video here today. I'm incredibly excited to go over it, but of course, if you are excited as well, let me know down in the comment section below. What series was the most interesting to you this week? What teams do you like? What teams do you not like? I'd love to hear you guys' thoughts and feedback, of course. Also, if you didn't watch the games, let me know what you think of the video down in the comment section below as well. But without further ado, again, I don't want to waste too much time because these LPL videos in particular are so long with 7 days of action and 18 series to go over. Let's go ahead and jump right into it, starting, of course, with day number 1. And we kick day number 1 off with a mid-tier matchup, which I think has become kind of tradition here in the LPL. We have ThunderTalk Gaming taking on Rare Adam, and ThunderTalk is able to take the 2-0 series win. Big win for ThunderTalk. They continue their, I would say, upward ascent is the way that I would put it. This team really struggled to kick off the season, but ever since they got their full lineup in here with Yao Yao in the support position, ever since Beishwan has really started stepping it up again, it feels like this team has hit its potential, and that's a really good sign for a ThunderTalk team that, quite frankly, is just playing a lot more consistent than some of the teams that are even listed above them in my power rankings right now. I have them at number 9, but, you want to compare them to a team like BLG, you want to compare them to a team like RNG, you could definitely make the argument that they have looked better this season. It's really, really good how these players have stepped up and how they've been able to capitalize on the positives that the rest of the team is able to bring. You can look at the score lines, and you can maybe see, Yucal was really good, big shocker, he's been good all year. Huanfeng and Yao Yao were really good, big shocker, they've been good all year, but really, for me, the top side of the map was the deciding factor for ThunderTalk. They were the big momentum gainers in this series. I thought Beishwan had another really good series here. The Wukong Game 1 was spectacular. He was just dominating Leon, who had a miserable performance on the Gragas. We'll get into that in a bit, but he dominated that jungle matchup, was able to create so much pressure in the early game, and then translate that into just a dominant win. And then in game number 2, it was Hoya on this Gragas that really stepped up and was doing an absurd amount of damage. He obliterated Cube in lane, which I'll get to. I've been pretty disappointed with Cube over the course of the year so far, but he obliterated Cube in lane. He did a really good job translating a lot of that lead into mid-game pressure, which at times can be difficult on Gragas and on champions similar to that, especially coming out of the top lane, going into something like Cassante, who just has inherent pressure generally. And so impressive stuff coming out from Hoya, and I think when you're talking about Hoya's season so far, it's been good? Question mark, good? Hoya's one of those players, right, where you're just kind of, I don't want to say waiting for the other shoe to drop, but he's been relatively inconsistent over his time as a pro, especially his time on Damwon. He comes over here to ThunderTalk. He's definitely an upgrade over what they had in the top lane last year, but he's not exactly this superstar. He really doesn't have these, breakout games, and so the last couple of series have been a huge shock to me, but they've been a pleasant surprise, because I honestly think he's been fantastic over the last few series. One of the better top laners in the entirety of the LPL, which is high praise to throw out right now. He's just been hyper consistent. He's not making any mistakes, at all. He's basically playing perfect games. He's able to generate large leads for himself in the top lane, and he does a really good job translating those leads into real, genuine pressure elsewhere on the map, which top lane is notorious for not doing, especially here in the LPL. There are a lot of top laners that can get fed in their own lane, not a lot that can actively go out there and affect the rest of the map. It feels like Hoya has done a really good job being able to do that, not only, obviously, in this series, but over the last few ones, I would say, for ThunderTalk. So big, impressive stuff coming out from the top side. Beishwan staying in was clearly the right decision, like I said. Zhao Huangren's supposed to be awesome, and I'm sure he will be, but right now this team is playing too well with Beishwan in, and Beishwan himself is performing at such a high level that I feel like it would be a mistake to let him go right now unless you were willing to sell him mid-split, which I understand could definitely be an option, but this team really does click. I feel like him and Yucal have a really good synergy in the jungle mid. It feels like most of the time Yucal is the one that's going to be absorbing and taking a lot of those resources as we've seen throughout the season, but in recent series it feels like Beishwan has felt a lot more pressure, probably because of the signing of Zhao Huangren to kind of step up and, really, I guess, put in a carry-oriented performance, prove his worth to the team, if you will, and I think he's definitely accomplished that. Great Wukong game 1. Solid Sejuani game 2. Wasn't perfect, but a solid one. Really, though, a lot of game 2 was Huanfeng popping off late game on the Zeri, because look at that scoreline, 16-1-9. Yao Yao doing a really good job keeping him alive, by the way, on the Lulu. Really liked how they played that game 2. Yukao playing well on the Yone, and then Hoya just dominating that top lane matchup on the Gragas. So really impressive stuff. Another team victory for ThunderTalk, and this team really is proving it. Like, they are consistently above 500 at this point, which is more than I can say about some teams that absolutely should be above them in the standings. And so, great stuff coming out from ThunderTalk. They look genuinely really good. As for Rare Atom on the other side, this team's problem, like the problems that this team has are so apparent and they're so clear, and yet there is nothing that this team can do about it. Like, they switched out their support. Southwind is out. BKR is in. I believe it's BKR, if there is a pronunciation for that. Let me know down in the comment section below, but he is in. He was their LDL support for a while. I think he was last year as well. He's going to come in and play support for them. It didn't really change anything. Bot lane was still kind of meh. I think they've been meh most of the year. Strive is the one that's going to be generating a lot of the advantages for this team. Certainly not in game number 1, though. He had a pretty bad game 1. A really good game 2 coming out from him, though. Almost saved the entire series with that game number 2. But the problem is that it really is the same culprits that it has been for Rare Atom over the course of the split. It's Leon in the jungle, and he's going to get my dud of the series again here. I know that there are a lot of people out there that are really high on Leon. Honestly, a lot of analysts and mutuals whose opinions I really trust, super high on Leon. I just don't see it. He is an incredibly mechanically talented player. That I cannot deny. There are some early games where he will just take over, even against some of the best jungle competition in the world. It's the consistency, though. He's just never going to have it. He makes brainless plays every once in a while, and he's going to cost himself games by doing it. If you can get that out of his game, great, but right now, like, especially with how he has been on Rare Atom over the past year or so, I just don't think that that is ever going to be a realistic part to, disappear from his game. He's always going to be someone who, on the Gragas, tries to make these really aggressive plays early on into a Wukong who's just going to be able to take advantage, lose so much pressure off of it, and then basically just lose the game immediately. I think he's had a really bad split. He's been the worst player on Rare Atom in 2023 for me, and I think that's no more apparent than in this series where he just kind of threw away a lot of the opportunities for RA to be able to win. But it's more of a general problem, I would say, with this team. They're talented. Leon's an incredibly talented jungler. Strive is an incredibly talented mid laner. Cube, we know, can have good laning phases in the top lane. Assume has had really good moments in the bot lane before. They have no macro. They have zero understanding of where to be on the map and when to be there. And unless they fix that, there's just not going to be a lot of opportunities for Rare Atom to win games, and they are slowly playing themselves out of the playoff picture, in my opinion. So RA not doing super well. ThunderTalk's on the opposite end, though, really on the up and up. I think this team is playing really well right now. I'm interested to see what's going to happen when they start playing teams that are a little bit above them in terms of the pay grade. Right now, they're doing a good job taking care of the other mid-table teams, which I think you absolutely need to do, but if this team really wants to be considered a contender and not just a bottom playoff team, I really am excited to see what they're going to be able to do against maybe some of the upper teams in the league. Moving on to our second series of day number 1 here, and it's a really intriguing matchup, two teams that I actually just talked about in my previous entry. We had Royal Never Give Up taking on Bilibili Gaming, and BLG with a really big 2-1 victory here. They needed this, and they needed it badly. This team had looked like it was really on the ropes and how it was playing in recent weeks, and to be able to pick up a win, I know RNG isn't exactly the most consistent team in the entire league right now, but to be able to pick up a win against a team the size of RNG with the, talent that RNG has, is just a really good sign, and for a lot of your players to really be able to outplay them, especially in the late game, I think is really impressive stuff. So let's go ahead and talk about it. BLG winning game 1, winning game 3, they drop game 2. It's a pretty standard formula here in the LPL. Usually when you see 3-game sets, it's something like this. And I think it did go kind of as you would expect in a formula like that. Game number 1, relatively back and forth, but BLG is able to take it. RNG bounces back and really creates a lot of panic in game 2 based off their best player in Gala. But it's not enough, because in game 3, BLG really comes together, has some really good coordinated plays, and is able to prove that they are the better team in this series. And so for BLG, I mean, that's awesome. That's not something I expected for them going into this series really at all. This is a team that not only really struggled against good teams, but really struggled against bad teams as well. They really weren't consistent at all. June in particular has not been good. Yagao certainly not had some good, Bin has certainly not had some good performances, but I think everybody kind of played their part in this series. My player of the series, for me, is going to go to On in the support position. Now, I know there were some moments in Game 2 on that Lulu where he didn't exactly look perfect. It's not a champion that I would necessarily associate with On's playstyle of, you know, being basically the Hylissang of the LPL, where he's going to go and make a ton of crazy plays. He's going to try and, you know, really push the game forward. Sometimes he's going to get caught out for it. Sometimes it's going to be a huge problem, but a lot of the time he's able to generate a lot of advantages for his team, and I definitely think that was the case in this series. That Blitzcrank game in game number 3 was awesome. They had absolutely no way to deal with that. RNG, that is, had absolutely no way to deal with that in the late game. If Aphelios got hooked, he was insta-dead, and they had no other way to win team fights. Breathe wasn't strong enough to be able to split push on the Jax. Obviously, Xinjiao and he's not strong enough to be able to carry a team fight, and so really good stuff coming out from On. I still think he's one of the most underrated players in the LPL. You can talk about how BLG has struggled so far this year with Bin, Jun, Yagao on the top side, not necessarily clicking as a unit as you would expect, but you cannot say that On has been disappointing. I think On and Elk have definitely been the strength of BLG over the course of the year, or at least the consistent strength, and I still think that he is an incredibly good support, one of the best in the entire world. Now, he's going to have some bad games every once in a while, but you're willing to overlook those because he usually makes up for it like he did in this series. He wasn't the only player to play well, though. Gotta give a lot of credit to the solo laners as well. I think both of them really popped off in this series, one with a little bit more of a flashy play than the other, but Yagao was really good. He feels like he's starting to hit his stride again. It feels like he's gotten a lot more comfortable playing with this team and taking a more, I don't want to say carry-oriented role, but putting him on something like the Akali and him gaining resources, I think is a valid strategy for this team as opposed to what he was doing a lot of last year, which was playing Talia and shoving and roaming and playing for his jungle. So really good to see Yagao kind of find his footing. I thought he was fantastic. He was definitely worthy of that player of the game in game number 1. And then we got to talk about Bin. I think some people are going to give him player of the series purely for that ultimate by the end of game number 3, but, you know, he had some moments before that where it was a little bit questionable. I thought the Jax game in game 2 wasn't exactly perfect, but that Kennen ult in game 3, that's what you live for as a top lane player, is to get basically like a 4 or 5 man Kennen ult and just instantly end the game. It's really good to see Bin kind of get a measure of revenge, I would say, against his former team. Obviously, Breathe and Bin swapped at the end of spring last year, so good to see those two teams play off against each other. Always an interesting rivalry, but Bin definitely getting the better of RNG in this one, and that was clear by that Kennen play. I would say overall, everybody on BLG looking good. I still think Jun has some questionable plays. Was caught out a couple of times, especially on that Kindred in game 3, but luckily, you have a nice get-out-of-jail-free card with that ultimate, so you're able to kind of capitalize on that. But overall, I think everybody on BLG looked a lot better in the series than they had up until this point in the year, and that's always going to be a good sign. As for RNG on the other side, this team's just in flux. They are not consistent at all, and a lot of it just seems to be cohesion and chemistry as a team. Gala and Ming are playing fine, and especially in that game 2, where they were able to win it, a lot of that was off the back of Gala playing really well on the Aphelios and Ming setting him up really well on the Renata. I'm not worried about this bot lane, but I am worried about this jungle mid duo, which just continues to be an issue. I don't think either player is bad, but I certainly don't think either player is good at playing with the other. You can talk about Angel kind of being, I've compared him to this player in the past, kind of being the LPL's Larson in that sense of, like, he's a really solid mid laner that isn't often going to, like, get blasted in lane, or he's not often going to be behind. He's going to be useful in team fights, but he's not really someone who's going to be, you know, the top player on the team, someone who you can have carry games. That's okay, so long as you have talent around them that's going to be able to do that. And Wei is also, I would say, more of a supportive jungler. He does like his resources in the early game, but typically he wants to give those away by the time we hit the team fight stage in the late game. That was really good with Xiaohu, because Xiaohu could generate his lead by himself. In the 1v1, Wei could generate his lead by himself in the 1v1, and then Wei could use that advantage to help get Xiaohu even more ahead. But with Angel, it just doesn't feel like these two have very much synergy as a duo. Wei's going to get my dud of the series here. He was just out-jungled by Jun, and I didn't think Jun had a particularly good game here either, but 3 early game champs coming out here for Wei and not really winning any of the early games, maybe with the exception of game number 2, is just disappointing. That game 3 in particular was not good, but I think you could realistically give this to Angel in the mid lane as well. That jungle mid duo just needs to be figured out, because right now it is a gigantic hole in how RNG wants to play the game. And they don't really have a solution for it. It has really been for RNG up to Gala and Ming, who I still think are fantastic. I don't want to, you know, put them down by saying that RNG isn't playing well right now. Gala in particular is world class, and he still has been world class over the course of the year. But if this team continues to have its struggles basically everywhere else on the map, this team's going to struggle to win games. And now you're sitting at 5-7. You're legitimately in a spot where it could be difficult for you to make playoffs. Like, you have to start winning eventually. There are a lot of teams in the mid part of the LPL that are solid, and if you don't start capitalizing on some of these games, those teams will, and you're going to lose out on a top 10 spot. So RNG is kind of in do or die mode as we hit the back part of the season, I should say. But BLG is going to be really happy about this win. This puts them in a much more comfortable spot above 500. They really needed this. Hopefully, they're going to be able to keep up the momentum. It does feel like this team has gotten a little bit more consistent, a little bit better as the weeks have gone on. That's kind of the BLG special. So hopefully, that continues into the rest of the regular season, then eventually into playoffs. Because if this team is playing at a good level, if On and Elk are really strong, if Bin and Yagao are doing well, if June's just not a liability, BLG is a team that can be a little bit dangerous, especially in the first couple rounds of the playoffs. But, you know, it's all about getting this version of the team that played in this series rather than some of the versions we've seen earlier this year. Moving on now to day number 2 this week, week 8 of the LPL. We had a top-of-the-table clash right at the beginning of the week. Usually we save these for the weekend games, but really glad to get it early. We had Edward Gaming taking on Weibo Gaming, and EDG picks up the 2-1 series win to solidify themselves right at the top of the standings with anybody else in the LPL. This is a team that has consistently defied expectations basically all year long. A lot of people thought they were going to fall down quite a bit, but I like them a lot in my preseason. They have proven me absolutely right. Even I could not have predicted the jungle mid duo to get along this well in terms of in-game chemistry. I could have predicted the bot lane to be as good as they are, because I did, and, you know, it's really good to see Leave actively stepping up, but part of what really makes this EDG team dangerous is that it's not just jungle mid, it's not just bot lane. Top lane is really playing at a high level right now as well. My player of the series is going to go to Ale in the top lane, and it's just a good sign overall for this EDG team. Ale's one of those players that really needs momentum, I would say, and confidence in order to play at his absolute best, and he's playing with a lot of momentum and confidence right now. Not only is the team around him really performing, he doesn't feel the pressure to have to carry every single game like he has for some teams in the past, but I think he feels comfortable to go and try and make some of these aggressive plays because he knows his team has his back. And he made a lot of them, and he made a lot of them look really good in this series. A really good game 1 coming out from him on the Renekton. I would argue it was the most impressive game of the series, but he was still really good on the Sion across both of the final 2 games. Sion can be one of those picks where you can look really good, but you can kind of excuse looking really bad because Sion's a tank, and also, you know, his passive, you want him to die. Like, it's okay for him to die every once in a while, but when you play a Sion at a high level, it is super noticeable because you can control side lanes, you're a monster in team fights, as well as the fact that you're actually pretty difficult to deal with in the 1v1 if you are ahead. And so, Ale playing his matchups, in my opinion, really well, just being better than the Shy in this series, and that's a big reason why EDG was able to generate such a large lead in this series, in my opinion. So big credit to Ale, he was really good. JJ and Fofo continue to be incredibly successful as a jungle mid duo. I would say game 1 especially, they were really solid, but game 3, JJ actually fell a little bit behind on the elites in the early game. It was just a really good job done by Mako, I will say in particular, but also Fofo, to help get JJ back on the map, and then that Elise became a huge problem in the mid game for Weibo to actually deal with. Once Elise actually got gold and actually got back in the game, it was really, really difficult to shut her down. She still is going to do a lot of damage even in the late game. I know people overlook that, and people, you know, kind of say like, oh, Elise falls off heavily in the mid game or in the late game, right? Like, that's kind of true. Again, I've said this a bit on the channel, but Elise's late game falls off because she becomes incredibly squishy, and there's so much damage in the game that her survivability goes down. Her damage does not go down. She still is a very high damage AP carry in the late game, and we kind of saw that coming out from JJ. So I would say Ale, JJ, definitely standouts. Leave was phenomenal in this series. A really good game 3 from him on the Caitlyn. He was still good in game number 1 on the Zeri. He has impressed me just about as much as I could have asked for. I was really high on him coming into the season. I said in my preseason predictions that he was easily going to be the best LDL player to come up this split, that he was going to be, you know, he was going to prove himself to be one of the better bot laners in the entire league very quickly because of the mechanics that he has. Obviously, we've talked about the laning phase and how there are times where he's going to get down early on in lane just because that's not his strength, but his team fighting prowess is incredibly good, and honestly, his laning has far surpassed any expectations I had for him. He has proven himself to be one of the more interesting young bot laners in the LPL right now, and that's big. I think obviously having Mako certainly helps that. He's one of the best players in LPL history. Fofo's been playing at an MVP level. Everybody on EDG just kind of feels like they're clicking right now, and that was definitely shown off in this series. As for Weibo, on the other side, you know, feast your famine team, they either win or they don't. You're born to win trade, you know, whatever catchphrase you want to throw out here for Weibo. Unfortunately, it came back to bite them in this series. I think a couple of players played really well. I think Light in particular had a really solid series. He basically single-handedly won game 2, and he did an okay job trying to keep them in the rest of the games, but there were a couple players that I think really threw away their chances in game 3 after a pretty decent early game. I think that Crisp had a really bad game number 3. I've actually praised Crisp a lot over the course of the year so far. I think his stability with Light down in the bottom lane has been a huge boon for Weibo, but unfortunately he had his first like really bad game in game number 3 here. And then the other player, my dud of the series, is going to go to Xiaohu in the mid lane. I actually think Xiaohu's been pretty good. I gave him player of the week last week in the LPL, but this was not a good series. He was down like a lot of CS every single game. I'm not exactly sure what happened. He's a really good laner, and he has been over the course of the year. It's not like his laning stats are awful, but this series he just got absolutely blasted by Fofo in the mid lane, had basically no impact roaming around the map, playing 3 control mages, right? Victor, Syndra. You're going to get outscaled if you're not going to be able to farm and keep up with something like an Azir in particular. And unfortunately, that's just what happened. Xiaohu basically had no impact on this series. You can look at the deaths, you can be like, maybe he wasn't actually that bad. 3, 4, and 11 really isn't that bad of a scoreline, but the impact that he had on this series was basically none, and quite frankly, it was disappointing. You wanted to see him be able to go head-to-head with a player like Fofo, who, yes, is having an MVP caliber season, is really breaking out, maybe is EDG's best player, but you know, Xiaohu's not far behind in terms of what he's been able to accomplish at his best in 2023. So to see him get just completely outplayed in this series is definitely a little disappointing. But again, another player that I would consider rather streaky. Can have really good games. As we've seen here, we can also have pretty bad games, and so it's just unfortunate. I think Karsa had some moments where he looked really good. I thought he had a really good early game in game number 2, really setting Weibo up. I do think that obviously some of his misplays in game number 3 were definitely on blast. Some of the missed Sejuani ults were definitely noticeable, but I think for the most part, Karsa was certainly not the problem here. I would say the Shy definitely had moments where he looked good. Light had moments where he looked good, but everybody else, jungle mid, and then support in particular, were just not able to keep up with EDG, and that was probably the big difference maker here. Overall, for Weibo, I would say this team is still fine, right? Like, they are a solid team. Losing to EDG certainly isn't going to be a disaster, but we know who they are. They're a team that, you know, if they show up and if they play their game, they're gonna win. If they show up and they don't play their game and Xiaohu, you know, falls behind in CS and Crisp is just randomly walking around the map on Nami and dying, like, they're probably not going to win that series, even against teams that are worse than EDG. It's really never up to the enemy. When it comes to Weibo Gaming, it's almost always up to how they play their game, and unfortunately in this one, it just wasn't very good. But for EDG, 9-2, I mean, that's about as good as you can start the season, especially, you know, losing Viper in the bot lane, you know, switching out Scout in the mid lane, who's also on MVP pace. Like, there were a lot of changes and a lot of question marks about how this roster was going to gel in 2023. I feel like at this point, though, pretty much all of those have been answered. This team is very consistent, they are very talented, and they are a legitimate threat. This is one of the best teams in the entire world right now, and they proved it again in this series. And then moving on to our second series of day number 2 here, and it's another good one, another top of the table clash. What a day 2 here in the LPL. We had Top Esports taking on LNG Esports, and LNG picks up the really solid 2-0 win. Not a single game dropped from them in this best of 3, and they honestly just looked like the better team. There were definitely moments in game 2 where they were a little up and down, I would say, but I think we are well past the point where we can say that Tarzan and Scout are just the best jungle mid duo in the world right now. I mean, maybe with the exception of Owner and Faker, I can't think of another duo that is playing at this level so consistently. Like, yes, Peanut and Chovy have their moments where they look like this, but they've had some bad series this year. I don't think Tarzan and Scout have had any bad series up until this point this year, so really, really big stuff coming out from LNG. I think they're proving a lot of the people who said that they had a fraudulent record because of the teams that they faced wrong right now, because they are really stepping up and playing at a ridiculously high level. My player of the series is going to go to Tarzan in the jungle. He's gotten quite a few of these. I know Scout has also gotten quite a few of these for me this year, but this jungle mid duo, they are both performing at a ridiculous level. You can talk about both of them. being in the MVP conversation right now because I think they both absolutely deserve to be in that conversation, and this series just backs it up. Two fantastic games coming out from Tarzan. Game number 1 was particularly fun to watch on the Lee Sin. It's always good to see Tarzan play a champion that can really take over the early game and then just kind of spread the wealth. He can do damage, he can play more supportive, he can really facilitate his lanes, he can do everything on the map with this Lee Sin champion, and obviously when Tarzan's given those keys, he's probably going to be able to make use of them as he did in game 1, but he also had a phenomenal game 2 on the Wukong. Really good job setting up the late game team fights. I think without some of these Wukong engages, it would have been a lot more difficult for LNG to actually play out the late game here because there was gold on the side of Top Esports. You can see it goes almost 40 minutes in game 2. This is relatively back and forth, but Tarzan definitely a big reason why they were able to close it out in the end. The other player, obviously, Scout in the mid lane, who has just been terrific. I see a lot of people calling him the MVP of the split so far, and hard for me to argue that. Like, legitimately, he is right up there with almost anybody for me. Really good Gragas game in game 1 where he's able to separate himself from Rookie. He's able to do a lot of damage in the mid-game skirmishes. Ryze really needs to get online, wants to get in those side lanes, and wants to try to pressure macro-wise, but Gragas is just going to facilitate a lot of what the rest of the team wants to do, especially when you've got Zeri, Annie as your bot lane, which is just super volatile. If you can get those two ahead, you're going to be able to win. And so good game in game 1, but really it's about the game 2, in my opinion, when Scout really steps up on the Ryze himself and is able to do a ton. Obviously, you know, we talked about the split pressure that Ryze can create, but he's also really good in team fights. Like, he can output a ridiculous amount of damage so long as he gets the time to be able to do so, and you've got divers like Camille, like Wukong, you've got Annie to be able to stun things up. Like, you have time on this team to allow Ryze to be able to take over, and Scout, I thought, had a really good game too. Having Tarzan and Scout on the same team right now just feels like a cheat code. It feels like these two have been playing together for years, which is crazy to say because obviously both of them long-time LoL players, never played together before this year, so fantastic to see them both playing at such a high level for LNG. Obviously, the rest of the team's doing well in that same vein. I thought Zika and LP were pretty solid. They just need to survive, in my opinion. You could talk about Tarzan and Scout being the lifeblood. I talked about this in my preseason predictions, but if these two are playing at the level that you need to, really, you're just asking your side lanes to be good enough. They don't need to be carries, and that's what they were in this series. They were good enough, and as we can see, that's good enough to beat one of the best teams in the entire world. Hang was pretty good, got caught out a bit in game number 2, a little bit too much in my opinion, but, you know, for the most part, I would say LNG was really solid and was a positive overall. For Top Esports on the other side, though, yeah, I don't really like how you lost this series. I don't really like how you just got outplayed, and I especially don't like the players that really disappointed for me, which was the jungle mid on the other side. I know you're going into Tarzan and Scout, who, like I said, have been really on fire as of this year, but Tian and Rookie are good players, and, you know, you would expect them to be able to step up and perform at least decently against those two. I just didn't think they did in this series, especially in game number 2, where I felt they both really let their team down. Rookie really whiffed on a lot of those Orianna ultimates, a lot of times only hitting the Annie and being able to blow her up, yes, but then you've got nothing for the Zeri, or you've got nothing for the Aphelios, I should say, and then nothing for the Ryze, and you lose that team fight pretty much 10 times out of 10. You've got Tian running around on Lee Sin, not really winning in the early game, and then just kind of being a nuisance in the late game. You have Jackie Love getting caught out, being pushed a little too far forward, although I'm a little bit more willing to excuse it. I just think the jungle mid was disappointing. Tian's going to get my dud of the series, and honestly, it's not the first series this year that I've been like, Tian's just kind of been meh, right? I was lower on him last year when he won MVP. I was definitely lower on him at Worlds, where I thought he was the worst player on top, and a big reason why they weren't able to get out of their group at Worlds, and it feels like a lot of that, unfortunately, has carried into the LPL regular season. I like Tian as a player, but he's just not stepping up. He's not being that elite-level jungler that we know he can be. He hasn't necessarily been a nuisance and a problem for Top Esports all split long, but what he has been is kind of irrelevant towards this team's success. Usually when they win, Ching Tian's had some really good games, Jackie Love's had some solid ones, Rookie's had some really good games. It is hardly ever Tian actively winning in the early game, creating jungle pressure, and then facilitating that to the rest of the map. It is a lot of the rest of the team kind of carrying him. So I really need to see this jungler step up. Top Esports absolutely has the talent to be one of the best teams in the entire world, but the consistency just has not been there. I thought Rookie was pretty bad, like I said as well. Those Orioles need to get better. His team fighting in general just wasn't very good in this series. I'm willing to call that a little bit of an outlier because he's been so good this year. And obviously Rookie as a player has been ridiculously consistent over the past decade or so, but this just was not his best showing, I would say. Jackie Love had some bad moments. Overall, Top kind of looking a little bit meh here, and that's a little concerning. This team has looked really good up until this point, so to see them kind of get bodied by a team in LNG that, you know, a lot of people were questioning, you know, it's a good look for LNG, but not so much for Top Esports. You would have really hoped they were at least competitive in this series, but to not even show up, it's definitely going to leave a negative, lingering thought in the mind of a lot of Top Esports fans. But for LNG, I mean, you're proving the haters wrong. You are now showing that you are legitimately a top team here in the LPL. It was not a matter of strength of schedule. You can go up against some of the best teams in the region and still hold your own. And I'm really excited to say that. I'm just really hoping that they can keep it up, because if Tarzan and Scout especially play like this throughout the rest of the season and in the playoffs, I mean, there is a real possibility we could be looking at LNG as an MSI representative from the LPL in spring. Moving on now, though, to day number 3. Day 3 was definitely an interesting day, not nearly as, I guess, top of the table important as day number 2 was, but still interesting nonetheless. In our first series, we had OMG taking on Anyone's Legend, and OMG is able to get the job done here across 3 games, but AL really is becoming one of those teams. I know they've been listed at 17th all year long, and they obviously really started out the year poorly, but this team has put up a fight against a lot of teams in recent weeks, even being able to pick up a couple of wins here or there. They have 10 wins on the season. That is more than a bunch of teams that are above them in the standings. And so we'll talk about AL in a bit, but let's talk about OMG, because they were the ones that walked out of this with the W after all. They lost game 1. That's kind of typical for AL series. I think I did the math a little bit earlier on this year. I don't know how it matches up now, but if AL or if the LPL played in best of 1s, I think AL would be like almost 500, which is absurd, right? They're really good at game 1s. They just don't do very well after that. But, you know, another game 1 win for AL. OMG didn't look exactly fantastic in that game. They pulled out a lot of their signature picks. I mean, we're looking at Shanji's Rumble. We're looking at Cream on a melee assassin mid like Yone. You know, they had a lot of things that they were really good at. They just weren't able to capitalize on it. And then moving into games 2 and 3, it really felt like they had like a mentality shift, and they decided to take over just a tad bit more. My player of the series for OMG in this one is going to go to Aki in the jungle. He's gotten quite a few of these, by far the most on OMG in 2023. He's gotten quite a few dud of the series as well, but I feel like jungle has just become a more important position for this roster over the course of the year. We talked about it last year. Cream, Shanji, those were the two that were really deciding whether or not OMG was winning or losing series over the course of 2022, but it's definitely changed, in my opinion, going into this year. It feels like Aki being able to generate an early lead, being able to create that jungle pressure and allow his laners to play a lot more aggressive is really what is deciding whether or not OMG can go into the mid game and play their explosive style like they like to do. And Aki, for the most part, I think has lived up to that expectation. A good Wukong game in game 2, a really good Jarvan game in game 3. I would say the Wukong game was slightly better. Not that it was like major difference. I think both games were pretty solid, but generally speaking, I think Aki was just really, really strong across this series, and he's been relatively consistent, in my opinion, across the entire year. Again, yes, he's had some bad games, but he's also had some really good ones, and I think this was a good example of that. The other player that I want to shout out, or other players that I want to shout out, PP God, definitely in the support role. I thought Abel was good this series, but I think a lot of the leads that they were able to generate in the bot lane, especially in that game 2, in a matchup where they absolutely needed to generate that lead early on the Xayah, you have to give a lot of credit to PP God, especially on that Rakan. It can be a very difficult game to be able to, you know, force an advantage in, especially going into something like Zeri Annie, which we've seen in previous series. It can be kind of difficult to force an advantage there, but you had to be able to generate it. I thought PP God did a good job. Really good Lulu game in game 3 as well. Those ultimates were on point. It is really important to be able to stop the Camille and the Maokai and the Jace and this big Wombo coming in and blowing up your Zeri, and so the Lulu was very important in game 3, and I thought that PP God did a good job being able to manage that. I thought Cream was good. Shanji was really good in every game that wasn't game 1 on the Rumble, where he was definitely the dud of the game in that game number 1, overheating at wrong times, so he doesn't have ultimate for a lot of team fights. Just generally speaking, you know, being way too far forward and getting blown up way too early. It's crazy because this is his signature pick, right? He dominates on this pick typically, but not a very good Rumble game in game 1 from him. Luckily, he was really good the rest of the series. Cream on 2 good games of Silas. Basically, everybody on OMG playing solid, especially after the beginning portion. And then for AL on the other side, this team is, like, competitive. I think that is more than I can say for them at the beginning of the year. They genuinely feel like they can play against some of these other teams, but they're not necessarily going to be able to pick up consistent wins, which is just what we're seeing now. The dud of the series for me is going to go to Xiao Hao in the jungle. I thought he was okay, especially in game number 1, but games 2, game 3, game 2 in particular on the Jarvan was just not very good, I would say, overall from him. Just dying a little bit too much, going a little bit too far forward, not really having a lot of peel for the backline, and then not really allowing his carries to be able to take over. It's just that over-aggressive mentality. Xiao Hao has been caught out in the past for having a mentality like that. I think for the most part, it's a positive, especially in the LPL, but there are going to be times where, you know, you go it's a little bit too far, and Betty, who has the chance to be able to take over games, just isn't given the opportunity to actually capitalize on that. That's fine. There could be worse situations, but Jaha wasn't particularly great this series. I expect him to be able to bounce back, though. And then the other player that I thought wasn't great this series was Pins in the mid lane. I like Pins. I actually think he's been a huge upgrade to this team ever since joining. It's not that he's been a superstar or anything, but I think he has certainly been a relevant LPL player, which is more than I can say for how this team has played the entirety of the season before this, and certainly more than I can say for what Harder was before he came in. And so I think for the most part, this is relatively, you know, an out-of-character performance. It just wasn't very solid. He got outplayed by Cream by a pretty hefty margin. Cream typically does that, especially when the rest of his team is generating leads. He's really good at playing from advantage, and so Pins not really being able to keep up isn't an entirely, you know, big shocker. It's not a surprise, but still would have been nice to see him at least be relevant in this series. But I would say overall, you know, Betty was really good, especially in game number 1. I thought Sword Art was really good in that game number 1. He was pretty solid in game 2 on the Annie as well. And then ZDZ up on the top side I thought was actually kind of surprisingly good. Not that ZDZ is a bad player. I actually like him quite a bit. I talked about that in my preseason player rankings, but going into a player like Shanji, his team not necessarily having prio, like it can be kind of difficult to play something like a Camille from behind, but I thought he did a relevantly decent job in game number 3, just generally speaking. I feel like if you're looking at the negatives for AL, unfortunately this series, it was jungle mid, which I think is a good sign because I have more faith in jungle mid being able to bounce back than basically anybody else on this team. And so maybe AL isn't the worst team in the entire league. Like, I'm really starting to get that on the radar. I know they weren't able to win this series, but 10-21, 10-22, it's not like the worst record in the world. There are certainly teams that are sitting in worse spots, I think, right now than AL. And, you know, if we would have said that in week 2, that would have been a really good sign for this team. As for OMG on the other side, though, they're a young team. They can get a little bit over-aggressive sometimes. There are going to be some games that they don't necessarily perform up to expectation in. But at the end of the day, they still were able to pick up a win in this series. And you have a really good record. This is a team that is sitting at, like, near the top of the LPL standings right now. And I know that there's a lot of question marks about whether or not they're going to be able to actually perform like that as the split continues on. But I talked about them in the preseason. This team has the potential to be one of the best teams in the entire world if everything clicks. And if you can get a little bit more consistency, maybe just get a lot of the good games out of your jungle. PP God's been really good for this team. I think Cream and Shanji have been solid. Abel's been solid. OMG is one of those teams that I could see, you know, sneakily finishing close to top 4, and I really wouldn't be all that surprised. Maybe they're not going to look like that on paper, but execution-wise, there are a lot of teams in the LPL that are less consistent and worse than OMG is right now. And then moving on to our second series of number 3 here, and it's an interesting one. One of these teams desperately needs a win in order to keep their hopes alive for a pretty contentious playoff race at the moment. And they got it. We had Ultra Prime taking on Team WE, and WE picking up the 2-0 win, and probably the biggest stomp of the week up until this point. The most conclusive win, I would say, at least, of the week up until this point. Really good series from WE. They needed to come out and pick up some strong wins here, and they did exactly that. This is way better than they've looked in previous weeks, and I think that is a really good sign. Obviously, this is a team that I think a lot of people had relative expectations for going into the year. People thought it was a major upgrade over what their 2022 roster was. Obviously, not much could have been a downgrade for a team that didn't win a single series last year, but you're bringing in Hope, who just made the semifinals of Worlds, Awandi, who's been a very successful player for multiple winning teams in the past, and a really highly prioritized LDL jungler. You were really hoping that was going to turn your season around. Now, it hasn't exactly been sunshine and rainbows every single game this year, but for the most part, this WE team has been very competitive, and clearly they are better than some of the bottom teams in the LPL right now, which is unfortunately where Ultra Prime is currently. So big win for them. My player of the series is going to go to Hang in the jungle. I said this a little while ago and got a bit of pushback for it, but I'm going to say it again here because I do think it still rings true. I think Hang is what a lot of people think or want Leon to be, me included, right? What I want Leon to be in that circumstance of, like, when Hang wins, when he's like the better jungler in the series, when he's able to generate leads for himself and his team with this great early game pressure, oftentimes he can translate it incredibly successfully into the mid to late game, and he can cause a lot of problems for the enemy team, whereas Leon just doesn't do it nearly as consistently. When Hang wins, WE typically wins. Like, he really is the barometer for what this team is able to do. He had a phenomenal series, great game 1 on the Maokai, great game 2 on the Lee Sin. Basically everything going right for this jungle right now. He's starting to, I think, click a little bit better with a lot of the players on this team. Him and Shanks, I think, have had relatively okay chemistry over the course of the year so far, but we saw Bew roaming lane a lot this game. We saw Iwan Wandy getting out on the map a lot in this game, or in this series in general, and so I think a lot more macro pressure being put on the enemy team by WE than what they had been doing in previous series, and that's just always going to help a jungler. Not only is it going to help a jungler, but it's going to make it easier to just win games in general. I think Hang had a really good series, was easily the best player on WE, and a lot of that was because of what the team was willing to put into him, but also, he's got some really great early games. We've talked about it all year long. That is his strength. Sometimes he struggles to transition it, but when he can generate those massive leads on a pick like Lee Sin, like the game is basically over at that point. Want to give a big shout out to Bubu in the top lane as well. Really good Renekton game in game number 1. He got out on the map. He was going and making plays. Bubu was somebody who I started to follow away again on last week. Someone who obviously I was super out on by the end of 2022. I was very shocked to see that they brought him back for 2023. He started the season, though, relatively okay, was playing, you know, not awful, definitely not being the big hindrance that he was last year. It started to get worse and worse and worse, and then obviously the O2 week last week, and Bubu really stumbling across the finish line in that regard really lost me a lot of confidence in his ability to play that weak side top, but he was a lot better in this series. It's a good sign to see him be able to come out and just survive. That's really all we're asking him to do, and so for him to be able to come out and do that is a good thing. Shanks continues to be great. He's by far the best player on this team, and it's not even remotely close. He deserves way more than having to play with WE all the time, but he had another really good series on some champions that he's been very good at, Ryze in particular. And then Hope and Wandy. They've had ups and downs, I would say, over the course of the season so far. Hope's laning has just been really, really bad. There really is no other way to put it, but, you know, put him on something like Aphelios, I think he's going to have a little bit of an easier time. He can survive the early 2v2 a bit, play pretty safe, and then get to that late game where he had a lot of great moments last year on a first-place JD Gaming team. Obviously, you know, is still going to struggle a bit in lane, but it allowed a Wandy to get out on the map to be able to try and make plays on things like the Annie, which he just wasn't really doing. Wandy was definitely more of a stationary 2v2 type of support over the beginning part of the season. Him and Hope, I don't think, have the best of chemistry as a duo, and they were losing 2v2s a lot of the time, so to see this team kind of pivot away from that and try to go to a more, you know, shove and roam style for the support here, you know, have a Wandy play with Hang, get out on the map. You know, we saw a lot of this last year in the LPL. Hope is very familiar with the style because he played with the support who did a ton of this in Missing last year or so. You know, I think overall, generally speaking, that's going to be a better style for WE in the bot lane for the rest of the year. I'm not sure if they're going to be able to do it every game. Obviously, it's draft dependent, but for the most part, I think they looked good given the opportunity to do it. As for Ultra Prime on the other side, this team's just not very good. I'm a lot lower on this team, I think, than a lot of other people. They've had some nice wins, but the talent on this team I just don't believe in, you know, generally speaking. I think Doggo's okay. I think he's a mid-tier 80 carry in the LPL, which is more than I can say for some of the other bottom teams in the league, but I don't think there's really anybody else on this team I feel super confident about. I thought Harry played one of his better games of the split in game number 1, even though Bubu did a really good job getting out on the map. I thought the Jax was really the only one on that side that had any sort of pressure, but outside of that, jungle continues to be a problem, mid lane continues to be a problem, support continues to be a problem. There just really isn't a lot of talent on this team. My dud of the series is going to go to Ning, and it's not even close. Got completely destroyed in this series by Hang on the other side, and honestly, Ning's just been incredibly disappointing. He's been one of the worst junglers in the LPL. I know we didn't really expect a lot from him in Battleland coming back after, you know, I believe a year or maybe a little bit, I think it was a year off. And, you know, none of us were really thinking that they were going to come back and immediately lead Ultra Prime to, like, a playoff berth, but for both of them to be completely irrelevant in a lot of games, even in games against, you know, teams that aren't necessarily the most cohesive and are a little bit flip-floppy like WE, you would have hoped that they would at least be able to hold their own, and they just have not been able to do that. Ning, in particular, I think has just generally been a weakness for his team. Obviously, I think that Ching in the mid lane has not necessarily been better either. I think he's probably been the weakest mid laner in the LPL, but there really isn't a lot of talent on this Ultra Prime team, which is why I'm a lot lower on them. I think if you get a player like Doggo to step up, they can win games, as we've seen the past few weeks. You know, when he pops off with him and Battleland, have a really nice 2v2, and you can get him moving into the late game, that is a nice win condition for this team, but outside of him, they really don't have a lot of starting caliber LPL players that can win you games at this level, so, you know, having that be your only win con is just going to be very, very hard to win. Ultra Prime knows that from last year as well, having Elk on the team, but for Ultra Prime, I don't believe in them. I had them at number 14 because I wanted to respect the results, but this is a team that I think I'm going to be lower on than a lot of other analysts. They're just not very good, and I think this result kind of proves that. As for WE, they needed this. Of course, you want to win from this point onwards. There are a lot of people competing for those 9 and 10 playoff spots right now. Even 8, I guess, is technically up for grabs. There are a lot of teams that are going to want to try to grab that. You need to basically win out in order to confirm yourself to get one of those spots. It's really the only way, especially for a team like WE, who put themselves in a little bit of a hole last week after losing both of their series. This is a good start, but they're going to have to keep up this momentum for the rest of the split if they want to push forward into a playoff berth. Moving on now to day number 4, and we kick day 4 off with an interesting matchup between Edward Gaming and LGD Gaming. And EDG does pick up the 2-1 series win. It wasn't always a foregone conclusion that they were going to be able to pick this one up. LGD has been playing a ton better as of recent. I actually think they've been very competitive in their recent series, and honestly, there were certainly moments where EDG looked like they were going to try and throw this one away, but luckily for them, they were able to pull it out in the end. They kind of still solidify themselves near the top of the standings. Their 10th series win of the year, which is impressive. They have officially qualified for playoffs, and that is a good sign, of course, for EDG. But let's kind of talk about the series, because I think there are some positives and some negatives to kind of take away from how EDG played. I think I'll just start by saying I'm going to try to exclude game number 2 from EDG discussions, because generally speaking, the game was just poor. They just did not play well. Kai'Sa Ashe was not a good bot lane. They got very much abused in the bot lane early. The Kai'Sa had no pressure into something like Jhin, and Mako clearly wasn't nearly as proficient on the Ashe as he was on some of the other, mage enchanter types that he played later on in the game. Not to mention the fact that Alle got completely run over on the top side. JJ had a really bad Sejuani game. It just didn't go their way. And so, generally speaking, when I'm talking about EDG here, I'm excluding the game 2. But I would say, without that, a lot of these players looked pretty good. My player of the series is going to go to Leave in the bot lane. Still very high on him, and I think he proved why in this series. That Kog'Maw game number 1, super fun to watch. Some mistakes made. Definitely was a little bit too aggressive at points, but I would much rather an ADC die for being too aggressive than just not get anything done, especially on a hyper carry champion like Kog, where if you're trading your life for 3 other lives and you've got a Renekton and a Jace following up, you're probably still going to win that fight, and that's what ended up happening. But Leave was really good. I thought the Aphelios game could have been a little bit more, but I still thought he was really good. His positioning in that game was a lot more sound. I would say wasn't really making the same kind of mistakes, but that Kog'Maw game in game number 1, he was dominating in terms of damage. He was dominating in terms of pressure, and I think Leave at this point has really proven that he is one of the better and more mechanically talented AD carries in the world. Like, I really think we're at that point. You can talk about how there are still flaws in his game, and I agree with you. He's not a perfect player by any means. He needs to learn the difference between a great play and a good play, right? Sometimes he misses out on making a great play because he just gets a little bit too excited to make a good play, which is totally fine, but, that's something that just comes with time, especially working with a player like Mako. But those mechanics of being a top-level AD carry at a world-class level, I mean, they're already there. He's already been fantastic. JJ was also really awesome in this series. Both of the Maokai games were really good. I think Broadcast actually gave him player of the game for both games. Not exactly sure how you can't give it to Leave for game number 1, but I understand game number 3, a lot of pressure that was taken early, and was just kind of able to be held on to. A pretty solid series from him. Fofo did a really good job being the secondary carry, I would say, in a lot of these games. The 2 Jace games definitely stand out, but I would say, generally speaking, this wasn't the same kind of, put the team on my back kind of performance that Fofo has been putting in earlier on this year. Mako was good, Fofo was solid. The only member of the team that I'm going to criticize a little bit is Ale, which is kind of weird because his stat line actually looks pretty good, but he was kind of bodied by Xiaoshu in lane, which we'll get to. Xiaoshu was awesome for LGD in this series, and he has really stepped it up as of late, but Ale, unfortunately, being the one to kind of eat that loss a tad bit there. It's okay. He's been phenomenal over the course of the year so far, especially stat-wise, and so, I'm gonna give him a small little pass for how he played in this series. Overall, I'd say EDG was really good, but that bot lane, man, that can get real scary. If he continues to improve, if Leave can kind of get to that standing where he's, near the top of the LPL ADC rankings with how JJ and Fofo and Ale and Mako are playing right now, this could legitimately be the best team in the world by the end of the year if they keep growing. As for LGD, though, they put up a real fight in this series. This was certainly no blowout, and they definitely wanted to show that they have improved a lot as well. Xiaoshu in particular was phenomenal in the top lane. He got player of the series for their last series that they played last week, and he was very close to getting player of the series if they were able to pull out game 3 in this one. He started off the season really slow, had some really bad laning phases, was always good mechanically, was just picked on a lot by enemy teams, and that really showed that he didn't really have the awareness, I would say, or the experience to be able to dodge a lot of those problems. That has all gone away. He was awesome in this series. He was just better than Ale, and Ale's been one of the best top laners in the entire region this year. So Xiaoshu improving is really good. It wasn't enough to be able to carry it because bot lane just wasn't able to hold up, and that's just unfortunate, but it's still a good, a good showing, I would say, from a player that I'm really excited to see more of. But my dud of the series is going to go to LPC in the bot lane. It's kind of the opposite for EDG. They all played well in game number 2, so I'm kind of excluding how they all played in game 2 because the Jhin Heimer was really working for them. But the games that mattered, games 1 and 3 especially, were just not super good for this bot lane, and that's to be expected. They've had some games where they looked all right, but I think LPC in particular, as of recent, has honestly been probably the worst player on this LGD team. I think Meteor, Xiaoshu, who were probably the weakest topside for a while, have really stepped it up, and they've probably been some of the more interesting players. Haichao, I think, has been consistent over the course of the year. LPC and Jinzhao have really taken a step back, in my opinion, and been a little bit weaker as a 2v2, especially going into some of the tougher teams now. That's not something that particularly surprises me. It's two players that I didn't really have high hopes for going into the year, but it is worth noting. I would say LGD is just one of those teams. They're going to be a tough out. They're going to be a team that competes, but they're not going to be a playoff team, right? 4-8, they're already really close to being eliminated officially, but hasn't quite happened yet. They're going to need a lot to go right for them to even come close to top 10. It just doesn't seem to be in the cards, but at the very least, this team is performing much better than anyone gave them credit for in the preseason, me included. Really like how their topside has really stepped it up recently, and I'm just hoping that development continues. And then for EDG on the other side, I know it wasn't the cleanest series in the world, but I see a lot of people calling this EDG's downfall, or, you know, a series to prove why EDG does not deserve to be a top team. I don't see that at all. I see a lot of improvement from a rookie bot laner, and I see some of the veterans maybe not having the best series of all time, maybe having a poor game too, which is going to happen every once in a while, but to see that even when some of your veterans aren't playing perfect, that your young guns can step up and really carry you, that honestly just gave me more confidence that this team is going to be fine. EDG is one of the scariest teams in the world, full stop right now, and I certainly would not envy any team that has to go up against them. And then moving on to our second series of day number 4, and this is another interesting one. I always love to see JDG against mid-tier teams, and that's what we got here. We had JD Gaming taking on ThunderTalk Gaming, and JDG does pick up the 2-0 win, and they came in mad. I know that there have been a little bit of doubts about what JDG truly is, but golly, man, when this team is on, when they are playing the best league that they can, they are the best team that I have seen play League of Legends in 2023, and that might even include T1. It is absurd how dominant they are when they are playing at their top capacity. It really does feel like it doesn't matter. It feels like it is an ego thing, a mental thing, I don't know, but it just is like, holy shit, when you come out and dominate a decent team like ThunderTalk, like they're not like the best team in the league or anything, but they're a playoff team, they're certainly a playoff caliber team. When you come out and body them like they did in game number 2, hell, even in game number 1, it's absurd. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about JDG. There are two people that really come to mind, but you gotta mention Knight. What an easy player of the series. Dude went 16-0-7 in game number 2 on the Ahri. In the LPL, against UCal, who's been having a career renaissance this year on ThunderTalk. I mean, this isn't fair. Like, having Knight play like this just is not fair. He gets his best champion, in my opinion, and Ahri, the one that he has gone on record saying that he likes playing the most. And you know what? Congrats. He took advantage of it. He looked really freaking good. It's just unfair when you get a player that is this talented playing his best champion, and then you give him all the resources. UCal certainly didn't do himself any favors in the early game by kind of running it down on the Ahri, or on the Annie, I should say, but man, like, 16-0-7, he was creating plays in lane, he was obliterating this Wukong out of lane, Huanfeng played this Cho'Gath, and it certainly did not work. I'll talk about the Cho'Gath pick in a bit. Obviously, I've seen, you know, the scrims and the solo queue stuff. We'll talk about why I think that there's a time and place for it, and this might not have been it. But Knight, in general, is just unstoppable when he's playing well. People have been mad at me for years saying that I overrate Knight, that I put him in a category that he doesn't deserve to be in that top 1, 2, 3 player in the world conversation. I mean, how many people can do this? Like, at a pro level, how many people can just flip that switch and get 16 kills, no-brainer, in the LPL against UCal, who's playing really well, against a team that's in the playoffs? It's just, there's not a lot of people out there that can just do this, right? And Knight does it so consistently. He dominates lane. When he's locked in, he goes out there and he makes aggressive plays. He's not afraid of dying. He's just very good at not dying, right? I see this whole thing where it's like empty stat line. It's not an empty stat line when he's carrying the game. Like, I don't understand. Knight's really good. Kanavi's also really good, and he dominated this jungle matchup, 2 games of Vi. You gotta be the better team to pull Vi off. JDG was definitely the better team. When these two are clicking, when Kanavi and Knight get to play together as a jungle mid duo, and when they're focused together and trying to play the game as a unit, they are unstoppable. They are the most talented jungle mid duo in the entire world. That includes Owner and Faker. That includes Tarzan and Scout. That includes Peanut and Chovy. It does not matter. When these two are clicking at the right level, they are the best jungle mid in the world, and it's not close. 369, you know, sometimes he rolls 9s. He didn't even have to. He rolled a 6 this game, and that was good enough. Ruler and Missing were a complete afterthought this series, which is insane because Ruler has been maybe the frontrunner for MVP in the LPL for me this year so far. He's been so consistent at winning lane and so consistent at turning that into skirmish wins in the mid game for his team. It just didn't matter because it was all about jungle mid and they dominated. Love to see it. Love to talk about it. Where the Night Hitter's at now. I mean, come on. You know what I mean? This was awesome. As for ThunderTalk, kind of a brutal way to go to 7-5, but at the very least it happened to a very good team, one of the most talented teams in the league. That looks broken on paper. You would have hoped that your players would have been able to keep up. Unfortunately, not a particularly great series. My dud of the series is going to go to UCal in the mid lane because, again, just kind of got run over in that mid lane matchup. He certainly wasn't the only player on the team to play bad, but he was probably the one that got most notably abused in this series. Beixuan was also atrocious on this Wukong. I think he was like 0-8 in game 2, 0-8-0, 0-8-1, something like that in game number 2. Not a very good game from him. UCal and Beixuan definitely let their teams down, but when you're going up against Kanavi and Knight playing at this level, sometimes you've just got to accept it. I talked about ThunderTalk earlier about how both Beixuan and UCal were playing at a very high level before this series. It's just all different when you go against a team like this that, you know, this is not the first time this year that they have absolutely brutalized a relevant team. It's just the most recent. So those two not being able to hold up. Let's go ahead and talk a bit about the Cho'Gath bot pick. I'm not going to be the one that's going to describe to you in depth how this lane works. There's going to be a lot of other great sources on the internet, a lot of really smart people that are really good at analyzing this, have already done great videos on it, so you can go check those out, because what I'm here to talk about is whether or not I think it was a good idea in this particular series. And my answer is no. I think when you're going up against someone like Ruler and Missing, I understand the idea of wanting to survive with it and scale into the late game, but that is all predicated, again, on the rest of your team being able to create pressure somewhere else on the map, and that just was not going to happen in this series. Huanfeng was your most consistent player, especially in that game 1, where honestly, he was okay. He was pretty decent on the Zeri. To put him on the Cho'Gath and to really rely on him being able to get to that part of the game where he's going to be able to actually fight back, it's just not an idea I would have went to in game number 2, but, you know, I'm glad to see it tried out at the pro level. I do think that there is a time and a place to be able to pull Cho'Gath bot off. I just certainly don't think this was it. But for ThunderTalk, it's hard to really take anything away. They went up against the best team in the league and got absolutely blasted. I don't think this is indicative of their actual skill level. I think this is just indicative of JDG's skill level when they're playing right, and that's a good thing. Again, we want to see this team be consistent, be strong, and it's really hard to say they were anything else in this series. I mean, it was utterly dominant. There's not really a lot I can go over. Kanavi was great. Knight was great. Ruler, Missing, and 369 were also good, but this was one of the most dominant mid lane performances I've seen in a very long time, and, you know, it's one that I certainly will not be forgetting anytime soon. Moving on now to day number 5 in week 8 of the LPL Spring Split. And we kicked off day 5 with kind of an interesting matchup. Two teams that I think have some interesting dynamics going into each other. A roster change, if nothing else. We have Ninjas in Pyjamas taking on Bilibili Gaming. And BLG picks up the 2-0 series win. And, you know, it's a strong 2-0. Obviously, 2-0 is always a good thing. Being able to win the series without dropping a game is always a plus. But game 2 wasn't exactly the cleanest, I would say, coming out from BLG. Either way, being able to win 2-0 is always good. There is a major roster change that is worth talking about here. Shadow has come in and is starting in the jungle for NIP. I don't think that he has had very long to scrim and practice with the team. Obviously, some tryouts probably did happen, but he was signed, I think, the day of these games, at least officially. He was announced as a part of the roster the day of these games, and so didn't have a ton of time to get himself ready to, I guess, maybe play with the rest of this team, and that did show a bit on the Rift, especially in the back half of game number 2, which we will get to, but let's talk about the things that BLG did right, and I actually think it was quite a bit, but it's hard to have a conversation with how BLG is playing right now without starting with their AD carry, who has really stepped it up in 2023. Elk has been really good for this roster, and he's going to get another player of the series from me in this one. I think BLG obviously has been a little bit up and down over the course of the year so far, but Elk has contributed in a majority of their games. Even the ones that they lose, he is often looking good. He is very rarely the problem, very often the solution, and I consider that to be a great trait, especially among AD carry players in the LPL, because there just aren't that many people in the LPL who can do that. We see that on bottom teams. Hell, we kind of see that on the other side of the rift here with Fodic. I love Fodic to death, right? And I've been comparing Fodic to Elk all year long. I think they're relatively similar in skill level, but, you know, Elk can play with a team that really does kind of suck every once in a while, especially Jun and Yagao in that jungle mid duo, and he can find ways to carry his team to wins. Now, that's not to say they were bad in this series in particular, but Elk's just awesome, and I'm using this to prop him up and not try to bring someone else down. And so, big ups to Elk. I'm really glad he's out of whatever circumstance was happening on Ultra Prime, that he actually has a support who is super good at the game in On. I think he's played every single hook champion in the game now through Spring so far, which is super fun. I think the Nautilus was the last one he needed to play. Maybe it was the Thresh. I don't remember. I think he's played all of them now, which is super cool. Obviously, he's super aggressive as a playmaker. I think every time I look at his vision score, it's at like 70, no matter what number or time the game is at, I should say. It's pretty ludicrous how consistently he gets wards and vision around the map. And he's really mechanically talented. So I think this bot lane duo is a real big problem for a lot of the other teams in the league, and I think that was shown off here. I think Jun had a much better series than he had in quite a while, going up against a jungler who hasn't played all year, was probably a little bit new to the team. He should have had the macro advantage, and luckily for him, he did. Didn't necessarily have a great early game in game number 2, but did a good job being able to bring it back and make the game relevant. I thought Yagao, Bin, secondary pieces, I would say overall, this really was about Elk's ability to carry and On's ability to facilitate that. The bot lane for BLG continues to be a massive positive for the team overall, and you're just hoping that they're going to be able to keep that up. As for NIP on the other side, some positives in this series. Dream was back in for both games, and, you know, there's some ups and downs to that. I think Dream pretty consistently has been the worst mid laner in the LPL in 2023, which is fine. You know, sometimes you just don't play well. Unfortunately, this year is a year that Dream doesn't play well, but Pout came in, played quite a bit for this team as well. Hasn't necessarily been a needle mover one way or the other. I would agree that maybe Dream has a little bit more upside as a player, so if you're not going to win anyways, you might as well give him the opportunity to at least try and play his way out of whatever problems are currently happening. I do kind of get that, and he came pretty close here in game number 2, got very quick, like 2, 3, I think 4 kills pretty early on in that game on Tristana, and just felt like, okay, this is a unlosable game for NIP. You had Photic on the Aphelios, and he was doing a good job scaling. How do you lose this game? Well, losing pressure everywhere on the map and then having your 2 main frontliners completely run it down the entire game is how you lose it. Shadow in particular was just abysmal. He is an easy choice for dead of the series. That game 2 was just so bad. You can talk about how, you know, maybe Invincible was running it down quite a bit in game 2, and I agree with that. Some of those Cassante engages were not it. How Zhuo was really bad on the flanks here with Annie, but really this was Shadow just being out of position, constantly giving gold over to the enemy team, and as a jungler, you need to be present and you need to be available for a lot of these objective fights. That's how you give a lot of other teams ways back into the game, and that's kind of what happened. This felt like an unlosable game after 5 to 10 minutes for NIP, and they found a way to lose it. Now, I don't want to overreact, because like I said, Shadow is new to this team. He's probably had very little time to play with any of these players, and especially with the mid lane situation kind of being in flux as to who's going to be playing for this team right now, it's obviously going to take some time for him to get used to it, but if first introductions are any indicator, this wasn't a big needle mover. Zhao Bao wasn't exactly playing great, but Shadow really not coming in and making a giant positive impact either. I would say overall, NIP is still a bad team. Honestly, a team that I'm very worried is not even moving in the right direction. It feels like they don't really have a good grasp on what works and what doesn't, on what kind of players they want to keep and what kind of players they want to move on from. They don't really seem to have any sort of idea, you know, coaching-wise or management-wise of what they want to do going forward, so hopefully they can figure it out. I do like Photic, and I think that Zhuo has been relatively fine this year. He certainly hasn't been the problem. I think Invincible is someone you can grow with, but mid lane, jungle have been massive issues for this team in 2023, and that certainly continued in this series, maybe outside of Dream's great game too. And then BLG on the other side, this was just a nice, solid win. This team definitely still has its problems, and they're definitely not going to be considered a top 3 or 4 team, you know, like a lot of people thought preseason just quite yet, but there are a lot of positives. Elk and On in particular have been great. Jun was good this series. Hopefully he can be a little bit more consistently good. Bin and Yagao, I think, have really settled in the past few series. It's really just going to be up to whether or not jungle can play the way that they did here, but with the bot lane playing at such a high level and such an aggressive style, hopefully that's going to be enough to carry them to a lot of wins. Moving on now to our second series of day number 5. And it's an interesting one. Really wanted to see a particular result, but it was pretty back and forth, I would say, overall. We had FunPlus Phoenix taking on OMG. And OMG picking up another victory here, this time in a 2-1 series. Little bit back and forth. We can kind of ignore game 2 a bit because I do think that it was a little out of the ordinary for OMG, especially in terms of how they played the early game. But it is worth noting that this team definitely has modes into how it competes. There are going to be games where they look amazing, where they look unstoppable, especially in the early game where Aki has complete control of the map and he's able to really dominate in that way. And there are going to be other games where it's just like, are we going to do anything? Are we going to sit back and just lose the game? Like, which OMG is going to show up? Sometimes you never really know, and luckily for OMG, at least in 2 of the 3 games, the good version of them showed up, but unfortunately, there really is still a lot of inconsistency that comes with this team. Aki's gonna get my player of the series again here for the 2nd time this week. He's honestly been really good over the past, like, month or so. He's been really good over the course of this season, but he had more ups and downs, I would say, towards the beginning part of the year where OMG really felt like they were, like, incredibly inconsistent. I think now they've kind of graduated into this tier where it's like, this is actually a good team, right? Maybe they're not going to be able to compete with every single top team in the league, but, like, this is clearly a dangerous playoff team on the same level as maybe, like, you know, a BLG. Like, I feel like I'm not crazy for putting them in the same vicinity right now. And I think a lot of that has been the development and the consistency improving of Aki in the jungle, who really was not the player I was expecting to break out on OMG in 2023. I was looking at Shanji, I was looking at Cream, I was looking at Abel. You know, adding PP to this team I thought was a majorly great addition, but Aki was always someone who I thought was just going to kind of be along for the ride with this fantastic solo laners and AD carry, but that has not been how 2023 has turned out at all. He is the heartbeat, the motor, the function of how this team operates, and I doubt that's going to change much in the future. He has really been the one that drives them forward, especially in the early game. If he's able to generate large leads for the team, they're usually able to capitalize and win those games, but sometimes it's just a little bit more difficult. The Gragas game in Game 1 was great. The Wukong game in Game 3 was still really, really good, doing a good job enabling Shanji, in particular, on that Cassante in the top lane, but I would say overall, Aki is definitely the main force on OMG that they want to play through, and I, for one, think that's great. I mean, you know, I'm not going to try and sit here and over-embellish what Aki has been able to accomplish. There certainly have been some bad moments, but, you know, I think his good games have honestly looked just about as good as any jungler in the entire league. It's kind of similar to how I was talking about Xiao Hao last year on Anyone's Legend when that team was really overperforming. You know, obviously, different circumstances this year. I think Aki has definitely shown a bit more inconsistency where it just felt like Xiao Hao was dominating the lower half of the league every single time they played. I think Aki is one of those players that when he's on, he looks great. When he's off, you know, up and down, very similar to like Hang over on WE or Leon on Rare Atom, although I think Aki has been much better than both of those two this year so far. Shanji was also really good on the Cassante. That's a good sign. There were moments in that previous series where I was like, no thank you. Like, even though Shanji's now starting to get some of his signature picks like the Rumble a little bit more consistently, he's not even performing well on them. He was having a little bit of a down split, a little bit of a step back, in my opinion, compared to what he was able to do in 2022, but this was a good bounce back. Going into a much weaker top side, Fearness, obviously, you know, kind of new in that top side. I do think he's a little bit better, more of an upgrade, and then Hacker in the jungle. You know, obviously, it's going to be, there's much more of an opportunity for a player like Shanji to be able to take over in these kinds of games. But it's good that he capitalized on it at the very least. It's good to see Jungle Top kind of playing well. PP God continues to be awesome in the support position. I was worried about that. Obviously, this is a player that has historically not performed super well off of V5, but, you know, obviously the only other place he went to was BLG, which, as we now know, is completely and utterly cursed. So, for PP God, it's good to see him perform really well in OMG. I think Cream and Abel were fine this series, but this is mostly about Shanji, Aki, and PP God as the main 3. Over on FPX on the other side, some good. I do want to shout out the good, which is the bot lane. I think LWX and Chocho are getting a lot more used to playing together as a duo down there in the bot lane, which is definitely a positive. There were moments this year where LWX in particular just did not look like an LPL caliber player, and I still have some issues with how he's been able to play. I do think his level has improved quite a bit from the beginning of the season, but, I mean, his positioning is still really bad in late-game teamfights. There really is no other way to explain it. This was not something that he particularly struggled with when he was playing at a high level, but maybe it's the fact that he feels like he has to completely take over games now, but he will just be in bad positions sometimes. He'll get CC'd, being pushed way too far forward, the rest of the team won't be able to peel him, and he'll just die, and the game will be over at that moment, so don't really know what's going through his head. He does counteract that now with a lot of really good plays, though, so that's a positive. Maybe cleaning up some of the mistakes is going to make him a lot more consistent. That's what I hope, because last year around this time, I was banging the drum for how much I loved LWX, how much it felt like he was driving this FPX team forward. This time this year, I am out on him almost completely as an AD carry or an AD carry to top level. Hopefully, he can start rebuilding that trust. I thought Chocho was really consistent, even in their losses as well. I liked the Rakan game in Game 3. It just wasn't enough. It was everybody else on the roster that let them down. My dud of the series is going to go to Hacker in the jungle. This was a bit of a jungle gap, especially in their wins. Hacker just hasn't been all that good for FPX. He has had a couple of moments. There are, I can remember specifically 1 or 2 games that he really stood out as being a really good jungler for FPX, but in basically every other game, he has lost the early game and then eventually lost the game and lost momentum. That's just kind of what what you're going to get with Hacker. We knew he wasn't going to be a superstar when he joined this team. It's interesting that they ended up wanting to go with him over Haoye, who I thought was not good at the beginning of the year, but at least he had upside. It feels like we know what Hacker is at this point, and, you know, he's kind of proving that this year. I still think Fairness is fine up on the top side, but when you're playing into Shanji, who's just more mechanically talented than you, and you put him on something like Sion into Cassante, you know, kind of boring lane, you're really taking away a lot of the ability for Fairness to actually have an impact on the game unless we get late. So he doesn't really have an impact. Care, you know, kind of coin flippy. I still think Care is this team's best player. I know that's a little bit of a hot take right now because a lot of people consider LWX just the cream of the crop on FPX because he's won a world title. But I think Care has pretty consistently been this team's best player over the course of the year. And, you know, he has bad games, trust me. Do not get me wrong. And he wasn't very good in this series, but I still think he's their best shot at being able to win a lot of games as we've seen throughout the year. FPX is just not a very good team. They're a team that I would consider in that grouping of a lot of teams that we've talked about, you know, LGD, Ultra Prime, you know, kind of in that little cluster of teams that can win games and, you know, can push, you know, good teams into close series, but for the most part, just aren't really going to do all that much. OMG, on the other hand, I mean, this is a team that really wants to push in for potentially top 5, top 6. I don't think top 4 is all that reasonable. LPL is really stacked right now, but this team is really kind of living up to a lot of the expectations I placed on them before the preseason, and honestly, my preseason prediction for them at 6th place is looking kind of good right now, to be honest. Now it is time to jump into our 6th day and our first of the weekend. Of course, weekend days are still super days here in the LPL, so 3 games apiece. And kicking off our Saturday games, we had a matchup that is right on the edge of the playoff race. We had Invictus Gaming taking on Team WE, longtime LPL rivals, all the way back to the beginning, facing off here in a very pivotal state. And WE is able to take a commanding 2-0 series win here. And honestly, they looked fantastic in both games. Most specifically, this bottom lane looking incredibly fantastic, which is just the best possible sign you could possibly get as a WE fan up until this point. There have been moments where the bot lane, I think, has been solid, but mostly in the early 2v2, this bot lane has really struggled. They were good earlier this week, but they didn't exactly face the toughest of competition. Now you're going up against a bot lane that has actually been very good over the course of the spring split so far, in my opinion, in On and Wink. On the side of Invictus, I've said it, On is the best player on Invictus right now, and it's not all that close. He has been very good, and Hope obliterated him in this series. Hope is a very easy choice for player of the series, 15-0-12, and he earned it. Like, it's not just the scoreline, right? It's not people setting him up. He played really well. He dominated the early 2v2. He knew how to capitalize on his lead, even in a game where he's in a losing matchup. Playing Zeri into Lucian isn't exactly the easiest early matchup in the world, even if Lucian is rather weak right now. We'll talk about that because he played the Lucian at a very high level in game 2, but it's impressive to see someone be able to take that Zeri and be able to make a lot of mid-game skirmish-oriented plays. We really aren't seeing a lot of that, especially in the LPL. Getting a player like Hang on Xinjiao who can really, you know, kind of affect that early game. Yes, he did int a little bit, but he kind of got the ball rolling on that Zeri takeover and just eventually became a huge hindrance for IG to actually try and deal with. Obviously, Awandi was also awesome on the Lulu, and basically the same exact thing happened in game 2. You get Hope and Awandi ahead, all of a sudden the game is over because bot laners deal so much damage at the competitive level right now. If you're able to get one so far ahead of the other, it really is an easy series from that point onwards. So a lot of credit to Hope and Awandi. They really are stepping up when this team needs it the most. They are right on the border of that playoff moniker, right? You're sitting at 5-7 going into the series. Coming out of the series, you're only 1 game below 500 in terms of series score. That puts you right in line with other teams like RNG for some of those final playoff spots. It's going to be a very interesting race, but WE has put their name into the hat for sure. Hope and Awandi stepping up exactly when they needed them most, even if the rest of the season hasn't exactly been perfect for them. I know I've been a little bit lower on them than maybe some other analysts out there, but, you know, I do think, you know, all that matters is if you can get there eventually, and right now, they're getting there. I still think Shanks is really good. He's definitely been the most consistent performer on this WE team by a large margin. Hang had a good series. It's kind of crazy. Usually Hang's, you know, good or badness kind of determines whether or not WE is able to win or lose a game. Luckily for them, he was just kind of irrelevant, and that's a good thing for them in this series. He took a backseat role, allowed the bot lane to really pop off and create their own advantages, and look what happened. I'm still not a huge fan of BuBu, especially in that game number 2. I still thought he made some egregious mistakes, but for the most part, none of them really matter if WE is going to be able to generate leads like this in the early game. This is exactly what I wanted to see, and it's not against a slouch of a team either. Speaking of Invictus Gaming on the other side, certainly some things to talk about. This team really does feel like it has cooled off a lot. I still think that they are a solid team, a team that should be able to make playoffs, but this isn't exactly a ringing endorsement of that. There are a lot of question marks here On is going to get my dud of the series, and that is a little bit worrisome, if only for the fact that, you know, obviously, I've talked about how You Should Know Me and Gideon and Dove have really cooled off since the beginning of the split. You Should Know Me in particular. He was really good in this series. Not really good. He was good in this series, but, you know, this team has really survived in that playoff role and been able to go toe-to-toe with a lot of these other teams that are around this zone because of the bot lane. That is really who has been keeping them afloat across the last month or so of games. And if On and Wink aren't going to be performing at a decent level for Invictus, I'm not exactly sure this is a playoff team, and that's where it starts to get really concerning. On and Wink just had a bad series. It's going to happen every once in a while. For as good as they have been, they still are rather new to being a top-tier bot lane in the LPL. These were the two worst players in their roles last year, and so to see them, you know, bounce back, obviously it's a great story in 2023, but obviously, you know, there are going to be times where they're just not going to be able to take over the game in that kind of way. That's where you really need someone else on the team to be able to step up. Ideally, this jungle or this mid laner to be able to do something on this team, and it just feels like they are massive hindrances. So yes, On and Wink were bad, but honestly, I feel even worse about the fact that Gideon and Dove have been so nothing over the course of the last month or so. I was praising Gideon at the start of the year. It felt like he was playing around You Should Know Me pretty well. He was playing around the bot lane well. That's all disappeared in the last month. I think he has been really awful for this team over the past 3 or 4 weeks. And then Dove in the mid lane has honestly just been a weakness for this team all year long. And that's not good. You can't have your weakness be in the mid lane in the LPL. Every single team has a good mid laner in the LPL. You can't be going up against playoff caliber teams. Even a team like WE, you can't be going up against a team that has Shanks and have your weakness be in the mid lane and expect to survive. You're going for Gragas, you're going for Renekton, these facilitating picks, and the enemy is just able to pick them apart. This team is, quite frankly, falling apart a bit in draft right now, and it's kind of showing. Invictus is really starting to worry me with how they're playing. Obviously, they have time to rebound, but this could absolutely be a team that ends up just missing out on the cut just because they weren't able to hang on to the leads that they were able to generate early on in this split. As for WE, though, they might be the team that passes them up. Obviously, currently, they're out of the playoff race, but this was a commanding victory over a team that they absolutely needed to beat. They didn't want to beat them. They needed to win this to keep their playoff hopes alive, but guess what? They're alive, and they're going strong right now. WE's on a pretty nice hot streak, and I think I could speak for a lot of longtime LPL fans. I'd love to see a world where WE is competitive and playing in the playoffs. I think this team has been a lot better as of recent. Obviously, they still have their issues. I think Bubu is still a liability on the top side. Hang certainly has some bad games, but if Hope and Awandi can step up and be what a lot of people hoped that they would be going into 2023, if Shanks can stay consistent, this team is dangerous and they have talent. There is a real shot that they are able to bounce a team like IG once we get to playoff time. Moving on to our second series of day number 6 here. Of course, the Super Day means 3 series per day. We get the biggest upset of the week as we saw LGD Gaming taking on Top Esports, and LGD gets it done. This team that really struggled to kick off the year feels like it's actually kind of found its stride as of recently, and man, they are looking good doing it. There is a lot of positivity, a lot of, you know, I guess excitement surrounding this LGD team at the moment. And I think the exact opposite can be said about how Top Esports played out this week and about how Top Esports fans are feeling after this week. So let's go ahead and talk about it, starting, of course, with LGD on the left side here. Ooh, I don't really know how to talk about this team because obviously there is a lot of good vibes going around right now, and I'm glad. I'm really happy that there are. I'm a little bit worried about how much this is going to last. I think that there are a couple of players that are maybe getting a little bit overhyped from this win streak. We'll talk about that in a bit. Player of the series for me is going to go to LPC in the bot lane. This was a really easy selection. He was awesome. He was the one that LGD pumped a lot of their resources into, and he paid them out. Obviously, him and Jinzhao, I think, were really good in this series, which is funny because as I was talking earlier on in the week, I was talking about how, oh, you know, Xiaoshu and Meteor and Haichao, they've been a lot more consistent, especially over the recent weeks, and I need this bot lane to kind of match them in order for this team to feel a lot more like an actual threat. Well, the bot lane matched them in this series, and they were an actual threat in this series. So big stuff coming out from the LGD bot lane. If LPC can keep this up, obviously he's been good enough to get a spot on a relatively decent LPL team before in JD Gaming. Jinzhao, somebody who, you know, hasn't necessarily looked fantastic, but has honestly looked better than I was going to give him credit for in that support role when he swapped over last year. I think this bot lane, while maybe not the best in the entire region, can certainly be serviceable enough to compete with some of these mid-tier teams, even some of these top-tier teams that are having a bad day, like what Top Esports went through here. But credit to LPC, credit to Jinzhao. I thought both of them were particularly good in this series. Of course, a lot of people are going to give a lot of credit to Xiaoshu on the top side. He is getting a ridiculous amount of buzz from LPL fans right now, and part of it I get, right? Like, he is incredibly mechanically talented, and he's had a really good, like, last 2-3 weeks of the season. I'm going to be a little bit more hesitant. He had a really good series here. I do want to point that out. That Gnar game in Game 2 in particular was awesome. Tian spent almost the entirety of the game up on top side trying to stop Xiaoshu, and he was still infinitely more useful than whatever Qing Tian was doing on the other side. But I want to just halt the unbelievable hype train coming around Xiaoshu just for a second, because while I do think he's a good top laner, he has his problems. He's grown a lot over the course of the year, and he's shown mechanics that he never really showed at the LDL level, but that's part of where my concern comes in. This is somebody who's played in the LDL for a long-ass time on an RNG team that never won anything, and he was never really all that good. Even going back and rewatching his tape in preparation for me talking about him in this segment right now, I was like, man, it's just not here, right? Like, whatever he's showing in the past 2 weeks, it just was not here. It certainly was not here at the start of the LPL season, where I think you could make a case to say he was the worst top laner through the first 4 or 5 weeks of the LPL. He just was not good. He was losing lane constantly, being picked on by the enemy team, going down in CS, going down in gold, going down in levels, not being a threat in team fights. Like, he just wasn't very good over the beginning part of the LPL season. So for as great as I think that this run that he is going on is right now, and trust me, I do really like what he's been capable of doing, I'm just hesitant on saying, like, oh, insert X top team here needs to pick him up, right? I think he could be someone that we look for in the future to be someone that continues to grow and continues to prove that he deserves that call-up, but I just don't know if I'm at the level right now where I'm willing to go all in on him as a player. I think him, LPC, Jinzhao were really great in the series. Meteor and Haichao did a great job supporting that, but it's time to talk about TES. It's time to talk about the other side here, because I do think it's important that we mention what went wrong for this team in this series. And honestly, there's not a concrete answer. I think, you know, obviously it's easy to say that a lot of their players played bad, and I do think that that's the case. I think top side of the map was just not very good at all. Top, jungle, mid, I think all played pretty poorly here. Jackie Love had some moments, especially in Game 2, where he was wildly out of position. Mark was fine. I don't think he made any major errors, but my dud of the series is actually going to go to Rookie in the mid lane. Birthday debuff coming in for the LPL mid laner. Obviously, you know, I still think Rookie's a great player. It's just unfortunate that he played this series so poorly. He was such a non-factor, not only in Game 1, but in Game 2 as well. It felt like he was just completely out-roamed and out-pressured by Haichao. Not only that, but he was on melee mids where he really needed to be able to generate his own lead, and he just was not able to do that. He was behind in every single game in terms of CS. It just was not a particularly good performance for Rookie. He's been really good this year, which obviously people online are very quick to forget when you have 1 or 2 bad games. But it's okay. I'm willing to forgive him. The players that I'm not, or the player, I guess I should say, that I'm not super willing to forgive is Tian in the jungle, who I'm going to be honest, has not been good this split. He has been a hindrance towards this Top Esports team overall. Yes, Rookie was bad, and yes, Rookie deserved dud of the series. He was the worst player across both of them in these 2 games, but this marks, like, I don't know, the 7th game of the split where I've been like, Tian, you're losing to worse competition, and it's not close. I don't really know what's going on with him. He really has not been the same ever since that Worlds game, and, you know, I really don't know if that's just a mental thing, if, you know, wrist injuries are popping back up, but, you know, this is not the MVP from last year. Like, even though I was lower on him and I didn't think he was MVP last year, he wasn't this. There was no explanation for him being this, and so, you know, the poor performance is definitely alarming, and I think it's going to hold TES back. Qing Tian wasn't very good here. Jackie Love had bad moments. Top Esports was just not on their game today, and LGD came ready and came, you know, willing to compete, and for that, they take home a series win that they normally wouldn't have gotten. Really impressive stuff coming out from LGD, but Top Esports really needs to get their ass into gear. There is no excuse for this team not being a top 2 or 3 team in the LPL. This is a team that should be pushing for finals and potentially an MSI appearance. Right now, I'm concerned if they're even going to be in the top 4 by the end of the split. Then moving on to our 3rd series of the 6th day here in the LPL. And it's a good one, 2 former mid laners clashing against their former teams. We had Weibo Gaming taking on Royal Never Give Up. And RNG picks up the massive 2-1 series win over Weibo. Big win for RNG. Not one that I particularly expected to happen, mind you. I thought Weibo should have been able to have this one in the bag, especially with how RNG has been playing recently, but this was a very big win for a team that absolutely needed it right now in RNG. They're now sitting at 6 and 7, a lot more comfortable. That's where WE is also sitting at, remember, and they're currently tied for that 10th and final playoff spot. So RNG really needs to kick it into high gear right now because they got some teams chasing their tail to even make top 10. Good for them, though, to be able to pick up this win. I thought a lot of the players that really needed to step up, again, did step up. The 3 players I want to point out, Angel, Gala, Ming. They were all 3 really good on the side of RNG. My player of the series is going to go to Ming because those arrows in Game 3, she was just dominating in the early laning phase. Aphelios Ashe is actually incredibly oppressive to have to deal with, especially if you can't get on the Aphelios, because Ashe is going to peel for that Aphelios early, especially if you don't have, like, hard stick. I mean, you know, Rakan can stick, at least relatively okay, but not to the level they needed to in this game. And then Ming is just so good at these Enchanter-type picks. I know that we talk about Ming as an engage-oriented player. And yes, the Nautilus is unreal. The Kai'Sa Nautilus bot lane that these two pull out is unfair to play into, and that's what we saw in Game 1. But he's really good at Ashe, and people are not going to respect that. And they haven't respected it all year long. He's gotten to play it quite a few times, and he's done really well every single time he's played it. The difference between this team with Ming and without Ming is staggering. I got a ton of flack last year in my top 20 players at Worlds video when I put Ming as my #1 support in the world. People were like, how dare you? Like, he's not even in the conversation. You're damn right he's in the conversation. He's really freaking good at playing support. And he showed that off again here for RNG. Another really good series and definitely earned it. Gala, of course, was also really good. Got to play a lot more of his signature champions. The Kai'Sa, the Aphelios, these things are a lot more viable on the current patch on 13.4 here because of the, you know, nerfs that have hit the Lucian and Zeri and, you know, a lot of these other bot laners that have been kind of meta staples over the course of the past year. It's a lot more viable to play picks like Aphelios, like Kai'Sa, you know, these Gala classics now, and he's always going to pop off on them. If you give Gala a late game champion and you let him survive early, he's going to beat you up in the mid to late game. That's just what he's going to do. He's probably the best AD carry in the world at that particular playstyle. It's what makes him so dangerous. Yes, he's good in the early to mid game, but where his strengths lie are those 5v5 team fights. There are very few AD carries in the world, if any, that I would take over Gala in those circumstances, and he showed that off here. What I'm really impressed to talk about is how well Angel played in this series. Going into Xiaohu, obviously, these two switching teams from last year, Angel being the longtime Weibo and Suning mid laner, Xiaohu being the longtime RNG mid laner. You know, these two going up against each other and their former teams, it's crazy to say that Angel got the better of him in this series. Xiaohu, I thought, had a really good game, too, on the Syndra. You know, one of his signature picks. He loves those control mages, but Angel, when he gets on these more explosive things, like the Annie in Game 1, even the Jace in Game 3, can really create a lot of opportunities for the rest of his team. I feel like Angel being in here has definitely helped RNG solidify their playstyle a tad bit more. I don't think it's been perfect. I don't think him and Wei are necessarily on the same page as of yet, but this series was a really nice movement in the right direction, in my opinion, for both of these players. And I think that showed off. Breathe and Wei were fine too, but really for me, the standouts for RNG, Angel, Gala, and especially Ming in the support position. As for Weibo on the other side, tough loss here. I mean, again, born to win trade, it's just kind of going to happen with this team every once in a while, but you would have really hoped they would have been able to pick up this win. They've been really good against competitively good teams, you know, top-tier teams so far this year, but they lost this series in a way that honestly scares me a bit. My dud of the series is going to go to Light in the bot lane. This is the first series where I've really felt, like, concerned with Light. He's had some up and down series, I would say, before. Most of them were fine, but this is the first series where it's like, oh, you're out of position. Oh, you're getting hit by Ashe Arrow every single time. Like, Crisp is not peeling for anybody. Xiaohu had a really poor Game 3 on the Gragas. You know, Carson and the Shy aren't exactly winning their matchups, especially in the winner-go-home Game 3. But Light in particular, I think, was definitely the standout. Obviously, I still think that he's a really good bot laner. I've been tooting his horn since last year on LNG when I thought he was criminally underrated. But it's really, you know, it's really concerning to see him just get outplayed by a team that has really been struggling. Obviously, I would expect him to be able to bounce back. I'm going to hold reservation and hold judgment until we see a little bit more of this Weibo team. But I don't think they're necessarily moving in the right direction right now. This is a team that at points in time I've said, you know, really could compete to even like make and, you know, potentially if everything goes right, win a tournament like MSI. But, you know, if the bot lane's not going to be consistent enough, that was really what was anchoring that opinion, is that you get a good week or two out of Karsa, Xiaohu, and the Shy. Like, Light and Crisp are going to be fine. Like, you're going to be able to deal a lot of damage to some of the best teams. But, you know, if your bot lane's not going to be able to hold up, especially as we get further down the stretch, that's a little concerning. Light, Crisp, both were not very good. Zhao, who had a really good game 2 on the Syndra, but he was outplayed by Angel in the other games. Karsa was definitely out-jungled by Wei, especially in that game 3. And the Shy was alright. Like, he certainly didn't have a major problem, but he was not great either. He didn't necessarily, like, lose the game for the team, which I guess is a positive, because it's the Shy, and that's just kind of how it works. But overall, Weibo's okay. Like, again, this is a team that has refused at any point this year to fill me with any sort of confidence that they're ever going to reach their potential, and that's just what it is, right? It's always going to be potential for this team. It doesn't feel like actualizing it is really in the cards for them this spring. But as for RNG on the other side, just gotta get on the right track, man. This team has talent. Gala and Ming are way too good to be missing playoffs. I know the top side isn't exactly playing great right now, and Angel's been a little bit hit or miss, but this RNG team should be able to take care of business down the stretch. This is a really good sign that they're at least moving in the right direction to be able to do so, but the pressure is certainly not off of you yet just for winning this series. Like I said, you are currently tied for 10th place in the LPL. If you really want to end up making playoffs and not completely disappoint the fan base here, you gotta keep this momentum going for the rest of the year. Moving on now to our 7th and final day here in the LPL in Week 8. Of course, these videos are always crazy long, so I really appreciate you guys sticking with me through all of it. There's a lot of fun stuff to talk about, but we're kicking off the final day here with the matchup between Anyone's Legend and Edward Gaming. And EDG gets the job done. Not a lot of fanfare going into this one. It's just the top team taking on a bottom team, and the top team coming out victorious with a 2-0 win. This is exactly what you want to see from them. They look really good, especially in that game 2, which was really a blow-away win. This was not particularly close. You got a lot of these players playing some signature picks of theirs. You got Ale on the Kennen and the Fiora, which I associate with him a lot. You've got Fofo playing some mid lane mages, the Syndra in particular, something I associate with him. JJ single-handedly increasing the win rate of Wukong, as we know from the LCK Break Room episode. And then obviously Leave and Mako just playing whatever they want, because they're really good at the game of League of Legends. But EDG is just really good in general. They're really good across the board. My player of the series for this one's going to go to JJ. I don't know how it could go to anybody else. He just kind of dominated the series out of the jungle position. Xiao Hao is really mentally checked out for this roster. It's very clear to watch because he's incredibly mechanically talented, and he's not even trying to make plays anymore. Like, it's not like he's getting caught being too aggressive. It's not like he's getting misplayed in some of the plays that he's going for. He's just kind of stopped going for a lot of the plays that he was going for earlier on in the year. I don't particularly blame him. I mean, if I'm on a team that's at the bottom of the standings in spring, maybe I'm just recouping my mental and trying to get back for summer, but you know, Xiao Hao's a good player, but he's given over a lot here because JJ was fantastic. Obviously, I said earlier, he's basically single-handedly raising the win rate of Wukong in the LPL back up to almost 50%. And then his Vi has been fantastic. Obviously, EDG's the kind of team that's going to be able to capitalize on a Vi going in just a tad bit better than maybe like your average team would. You know, just saying. And so JJ being able to pull it out and play it at a high level is not particularly surprising, but a good series from JJ. I think also, of course, Ale in the top lane. You got to mention that Kennen game in game number 1. He's been really good on the Kennen this year, you know, in previous years. It's one of the picks I most associate with him. Side lane, you know, obviously comes to mind, but I think when you're looking at team fight champions for Ale, it's almost always been this Kennen pick, and he really did a good job pulling it back out here, even in a meta where I consider that, you know, champion to be very weak, which I think he is right now. You still got to be able to play him right. You still got to be able to execute the flanks, and obviously you're still going to do a lot of damage if you're able to get the full thing off. It's just his laning that I think has, you know, struggled a bit, but if you're able to survive it and get everything off, you're still in a pretty good position. I think that showed off for EDG, obviously. Ale and JJ definitely the strong point of this team, in my opinion, but Fofo still looking good. Leave and Mako still winning lane. I think Betty was all right in this game, and honestly, Betty's been pretty good over the past few series, but Leave and Mako are just better, and that was shown off here. EDG was just the better team overall. They generated most of their, I would say, outlandish leads up on top side, but everybody on the team was doing well, and that was especially prevalent in that game number 2. As for AL on the other side, meh. I mean, this team's just not great. Like, they're competitive. I think Betty and Sword Art in particular have definitely gotten better as the season's gone on. Pins, I think, has turned into, like, an actual mid laner, like someone that you can look at, you know, keeping on this team and actually playing. It's really good to see that. I loved Pins in the LDL. Anybody who follows the channel knows I was super high on him. He was one of the most interesting players to come out of the LDL this year for me, and so I was really excited to see him get to play at a relatively decent level. Unfortunately, he walked into a dumpster fire AL team that had been, like, 0-6 when he joined or something like that, because they played so many games games early on, but he had a really good Vygar game in game number 2, and his champion pool is kind of interesting. I think he's a solid player and definitely one to keep an eye on. Xiao Hao, like I said, just feels kind of mentally checked out, and ZDZ got run over in that top lane matchup. He's going to be my dud of the series here. Ollie was just better than him. There's really no excuse. He was down like 30 CS in both games. He just was never really competitive in that top lane matchup. Obviously, Xiao Hao wasn't particularly good either, but ZDZ, in my opinion, was a little bit more obviously worse, walking in on the Jackson, just dying, not accomplishing anything in the side lane, not even contributing to a kill in game number 2. Just negative things that you don't really want to associate. Just not a very good look for the top side that just has kind of deteriorated, I would say, as the split has gone on. It was the bot side, in my opinion, that was the major issue for AL during their early loss streak. And then now, as, you know, team morale and mentality has kind of deteriorated, it feels like bot lane has kind of found their stride. Meanwhile, top side has taken their turn to maybe take some games off, and that's definitely apparent now. I don't think AL is going to be anywhere near playoffs, obviously, but I'm still interested to see what's going to happen with this team once we start moving into something like summer. Are they going to make some sweeping changes, get rid of some of the veterans on the roster, or are they just going to hope that, you know, with some more time, maybe you get these players to play a little bit better together? It's going to be interesting to see the direction they move in, but Spring Split's over for them, so there's not really a lot to talk about. As for EDG on the other side, Spring Split is over for them in the same kind of way, or in a different kind of way, because they are in playoffs. They are 11-2. They are guaranteed to not be in the first round of playoffs, which is just absolutely huge. This very well could be the #1 seed in the LPL coming out of the regular season. That is a very realistic possibility, and they've absolutely earned it. JJ and Fofo have been great. Ale has been maybe the best top laner in the LPL. Leave has taken huge strides. Mako's still one of the best supports in the world. This team is really clicking on all cylinders right now, and they're a lot of fun to watch. A 3-0 week this week for EDG, and that really solidifies them at the top of the LPL. Moving on to our second series of the final day here in the LPL, and this one was a good one. This was actually a lot of fun to watch. A little bit of a blowout, but kind of in a fun way. We had FunPlus Phoenix taking on Rare Adam, and FPX picks up the 2-0 series win. They actually won a series, guys. It's been so long since this team has actually won anything that I'm actually incredibly proud of the fact that they really stepped up and they beat a team that is on a downward spiral right now. Hooray! Their 2 carries both played well in the same game. Hooray! Hacker actually won the jungle matchup. Triple hooray! I mean, this is about as good as it's gonna get for FPX. The only thing that I'm worried about when it comes to FPX and this series is that this gives the organization the confidence to stick with this exact 5 moving into summer, because obviously this roster needs some shakeup somewhere, but this series was really good, and it showed that this roster does have potential, at least a little bit, together to be able to play at a high level at the same time. Want to quickly talk about the draft in Game 1? What the hell happened here? Did we all just, like, collectively lose our minds? Sejuani top's not all that weird, right? Vygar bot, it's a little weird for pro, but you can pull it out, right? Like, AP bots, underutilized at the high level, I understand, right? Especially if you're going to go with something like a Nautilus, you know, pair that up, try to get a lot of those engages in. Vygar, especially with the changes, can be relatively dangerous. Morgana? What are we doing? Like, this is just a weird game in general. Morgana Aphelios, by the way, not even just Morgana. It's not even like Morgana Caitlyn, right? It's like Morgana Aphelios, so very strange. Obviously, BKR must be a Morgana player. I don't know if he is or isn't. I haven't had a ton of time to watch his LDL tape because there's so many games to watch in the LPL, but, you know, when I go back and watch, it'll be interesting to see if he is a Morgana player. I'll say, either way, it didn't work out for him in this series, but for FPX overall, everybody playing well. My player of the series is going to go to Care in the mid lane, and I hate to be a broken record, but he's the guy here on FPX. I know everybody wants LWX to be the guy, and I'll talk about it. LWX is really good in this series, but when you're looking at who the guy really is for FPX, it's Care. When they win, it's often Care. When they lose, it's because Care doesn't win, right? It usually, and I like LWX, and again, like, I think he's gotten a lot better over the last few weeks especially, but Care is the reason they either win or lose the game, and that is just the truth when it comes to FPX. He is the heartbeat for this team. When he plays well, they win. When he plays bad, they lose. It doesn't really matter what happens in the bot lane. It doesn't really change the outcome of the game all that much for this team because they don't really play through them. And so, yes, LWX and Chocho were great. And honestly, look at their scores. They deserve a lot of praise. This is easily the best series that bot lane has had all year long. And I don't even think it's particularly close. It's also easily the best series Hacker has had. Maybe not the best. He's had some really freaking good games, but he's had some terrible ones as well. Just the inconsistency that's come with him. It's been mostly bad. He's had like 2 or 3 really good games. Luckily, a couple Two of them were in this series, so that's a good sign for FPX overall. Fairness was definitely better than Cube, which we'll get to. Cube is definitely on the downward spiral. I don't know if it's mental, but he's not having a good split. Care was awesome, though. How do you not give it to him? He was everywhere on the map, making plays on the Yone, making plays on the Annie. He was creating so much pressure for the enemy team, or for his team, I should say, that even with Strive playing kind of okay and definitely being the strength of Rare Adam, there was never a moment where Strive ever had an opportunity to actually influence the game in any way, because Care was just going to be way more influential in general when it came to how this team wanted to play. So, you know, just generally speaking, great series from FPX. This is easily, not even close to, easily the best that FPX has looked in 2023. As for Rare Adam, I'm just out on this team. They have joined the ranks of the teams that I do not believe in anymore, because everything has fallen to shit on this top side. The bot lane is, as I predicted, not going well, and Strive is in elo hell. It's just kind of, it is what it is, right? Strive is a player we'll quickly get to. He was the best player on the series in this team. I think he's been proving over the last few weeks that he's not just good at those melee mids. His champion pool is a little bit bigger than I think some people give him credit for, but it still is worth noting that he doesn't have the same kind of impact on the Syndra that he does on the Akali, right? There definitely is a difference between him picking those up, but at the very least, he was more competent than his teammates. And I do think that he is in elo hell. He is definitely trapped on this RA team because Leon has been horrible. I mean, what happened to him? I know I'm always low on him. I've historically always been low on Leon as a player, but no one can come to his defense this split. Like, there is no justification for how he has been playing for Rare Adam in 2023. He's been one of the worst junglers in the LPL, and it's not close. He's, you know, the coin flipping nature of Leon has just strictly been a negative over the course of 2023. I think generally speaking, a lot of these coin flippy junglers aren't doing as well this year because I think the meta is a lot more favorable to stability. It's a lot more favorable to those who can play Maokai and Vi and Sejuani at a high level rather than these more explosive, like, feast or famine early game junglers. Yes, Elise is good, but we're not seeing her be high prio. So, you know, picks like your players like Leon just aren't as effective in those scenarios. As for, like, Cube, I mean, Cube's been really bad over the past few weeks. On RA's losing streak, he's maybe been one of their worst players, like, right next to Leon. And then there's Assume in the bot lane, who everybody and their mother was so high on when he joined RA, and I was pushing back on it. I was like, hey guys, he's good, like he's an okay player, but he's not like this top tier ADC. I just don't see him becoming like Gala, right? Like I don't see him becoming that. I saw a lot of, you know, oh, RNG or a team like that should be able to snatch him up, right? I just never saw that in him, and he hasn't really, he's proven me right, I would say, over the course of this split. He's had some good games, but he certainly hasn't been a consistent positive. And then they bring in BKR here, like I said at the beginning of the week. You know, he plays Morgana in game one, but for the most part, he's nothing in this series. He's actually going to get my dud of the series on the side of RA. I think you could give this to Leon as well. Cube definitely deserves it on the top side. Hell, even Assume probably deserves it in the bot lane. But BKR for me really stood out as just like adding nothing to the game. Obviously, it's going to take a little bit of time for a new player to gel with the rest of the team. I'm always going to give them at least a little bit of leeway. You know, as you've seen throughout the series, I try to give new acquisitions at least a little bit of leeway, but this was not a very good first impression, in my opinion. This RA team feels like it's floundering, and it doesn't really seem to have a strength. Strive is a good player, one of the most underrated players in the entire world right now, but it is just simply not enough to be able to carry whatever the hell that is going on with the rest of this team. And then for FPX on the other side, they're hitting their stride, which is kind of weird to say. I mean, it's only 3 wins. Like, this team's not making playoffs or anything, but, you know, there are some positives to take away here and, you know, some potential playoff implications for these players. Care and LWX are playing well. I think LWX and Chocho are really meshing together. Ever since Chocho joined the team, I think LWX has been on a better trajectory, so it was good to bring him in. I'm still weary about the top side, even though they were good in this series, but there are still some question marks there. I think Care is your superstar, though, and I would expect this team to build around him for years to come. And that's going to bring us to our final series of Week 8 here in the LPL. And it's a good one. It's the series of the week. Not only was it the series of the week on paper, but it absolutely lived up to the hype on the Rift. We have LNG Esports taking on JD Gaming, and JDG picks up the hard-fought 2-1 win. What an absolute blast that we got between these two teams. Both of them proving they deserve to be at the top of the standings as they are right now. Both of them really showing that they are top teams that have a lot of fight in the tank. And you're not going to see it from, you know, everybody's score line here, because I think that, you know, the score lines for some of these players aren't exactly perfect because they really were trading a lot back and forth through these games, but let me tell you, it was a bloodbath, and both teams came to play. But JDG coming out on top thanks to who else but Ruler. I know I'm super high on Ruler as a player. I have been. I think he might be the greatest AD carry of all time. You know, him versus Deft, I think those are the two in the argument. You want to make the debate one way or the other. I think I totally get both sides. But Ruler for me is just one of those players that I will remember watching, and these are the games why, when he's able to just plug in and take over. I mean, did you watch that Game 2 Zeri? Did you watch that Game 2 Zeri? Did you even watch the Game 3 of Helios? Because all of it was so ridiculously good from a player that still somehow feels underrated with how good he is. He might be the best ADC in the world, right? Like, and I feel like we have somehow forgotten that. He might be the leading candidate for MVP for me right now in the LPL, and yet somehow he's not even in the conversation on most broadcasts. Ruler has been so ridiculously good for this JD Gaming team, and I think that really showed itself again here. Him and Missing do work together well. I think they work together in a way that is a little bit different than the typical AD carry and support dynamic, where it's not Missing just facilitating Ruler getting to play all these things. I think Missing kind of does his own stuff, but Ruler's totally fine getting isolated. He played with the support who wanted to roam and, you know, move around a lot last year in Lehens, and it really worked out for him. I think Missing has kind of adopted that role a bit more. Obviously, he played that a lot last year with Hope in the bot lane as well, and so I think these two are just very comfortable with being able to play apart from each other. They're both incredibly talented players who know what they want to do on the Rift, and both of them can capitalize on it. Ruler's able to punish every single other squishy in the entire game by instantly blowing them up and being the best team fighter in the region. Missing is able to control the mid game because he has excellent roam timings. He's a really smart player that knows exactly where he needs to be, and he as well is a phenomenal team fighter, especially towards the back half of the game, and those two are just able to take over. Now, that's not to say that the solo laners were bad. Knight had some moments, and 369 had some moments where they were a little iffy, but when the games mattered the most, in game number 3 here, both of them showed up and played incredibly well. We got the 9 on 369 in game number 3, and Knight, for all his flaws, was really good in that game 3 as well. The only player on the team that I have gripes with is actually going to be my dud of the series here for JD Gaming, and it's going to be Kanavi in the jungle. I'm not concerned about Kanavi. I don't want it to come across like I am concerned about Kanavi. I think he's still been fine for the most part this year, but it is realistic to say that he's probably been the weakest member of JD Gaming over the course of the year so far. A lot of the mistakes and a lot of the problems that have been created from this team have been on the jungle, and that's okay. Sometimes it's going to happen, especially because Kanavi isn't a particularly early game focused jungler mentality-wise. He's not someone that's going to go into the game and kind of, you know, try and take over in the first 5 minutes. He loves to play those junglers that are going to be a little bit more valuable towards the back half. I'm thinking of Viego. I'm thinking of Graves last year. Those were the picks that he really dominated on, and that really started to separate him from the pack, kind of get him back to that elite, you know, top jungler in the world territory. They're just not super meta in that same way this year. I still think obviously he can be really effective in the meta that we're currently in, but his playstyle doesn't necessarily, you know, I would say work with a lot of what is currently meta. Now, obviously the jungle is changing, and that might change when we get to summer, but Kanavi had some moments in this game where he tried to throw it away. Some ints in game 2, some ints in game 1. Even in game 3, there were a couple of shaky moments where it didn't look great, and so Kanavi was probably the member that was the least consistent on both sides. He's going to get done to the series, but that's more of a positive towards LNG than it is a negative towards JD Gaming. There were certainly good moments coming out from Kanavi, but LNG on the other side were just really good. I know Scout's scoreline doesn't exactly look great. 2-11 isn't exactly great, but he was phenomenal in that game number 1 on Lissandra. If they don't have him in that game, they simply do not win. It is that simple. Tarzan was really good across this series. Zika had some awesome mid games across the series. LP learned how to team fight. I mean, he was going toe-to-toe with Ruler. Him and Hang were both stepping up. Everybody on LNG kind of played their part in this series, and to me, they absolutely proved that they belong. I know that JDG isn't exactly the most consistent team in the world, but when they show up, they show up. And let me tell you, they showed up in this series, and LNG went head-to-head with them for every single game here. Really impressive stuff. Scout and Tarzan continue to be awesome, although Scout definitely disappeared a bit once we got to game number 3, but Tarzan continues to be great. If he was able to land that smite in game number 2, some things might have gone different. That might have been a 2-0 for LNG, and then Zika was awesome, LP was awesome. They're the two question marks, I would say, that come with LNG, the two players that you want to see stepping up against some of the top teams because they were a little bit more volatile, at least on paper, going into the year, but honestly, LNG has basically proven everything that I need to see at this point. This team is very good, they are very consistent, and I'm so excited to see what they're going to be able to do in the playoffs, but you gotta be able to say the same thing for JD Gaming. Both of these teams are top teams in the LPL, and they proved it here today. You know, you can talk about who the top 3 in the LPL right now. You know, obviously we'll get to the power rankings in just a second, but EDG's right there, JDG, LNG. Those are the super teams right now. Both of these teams really stepping up, proving the consistency, and I think both are going to be walking out of here with a happy, positive response, I would say, regardless of how the series ended up turning out. Alright, that is going to do it for my LPL Week 8 overview and analysis of all 7 days of action. Almost 2 hours on the video as per usual. I really do hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, let me know down in the comments and of course leave a like. But up on your screen right now, you're going to see the updated Week 8 LPL standings. Anybody highlighted in green has locked playoffs. Anybody highlighted in red has officially been eliminated. It's not too many teams yet, but we are getting to the stage where some teams are in and some teams are officially out. Of course, in the first column to the right, you're going to see my updated power rankings. In the second, you're going to see how those have changed from last week to this week. So let's go over the risers and the followers. Top 3 have really solidified themselves. EDG jumping up to number 2. LNG jumping up 2 spots to number 3. JDG staying at number 1. These feel like the 3 best teams in the LPL, and they are the 3 teams that have locked playoffs right now. But for consistency's sake, there really just aren't a lot of teams that feel like they are on this level right now. TES drops down to number 4 after a horrendous week. I have faith that they'll be able to bounce back, but I gotta at least show that I don't feel as confident in this team as I did last week. Weibo drops down to number 5. Not a great week from them, but BLG is actually going to leapfrog. RNG jump up to 6. RNG falls down to 7. Obviously, their series has a bit to do with it, but even outside of that, you know, BLG, I think, just generally looking at least a little bit better. I want to reward them by jumping them up to 6, but them and RNG both looking like they're on the up and up. OMG staying at 8, which feels criminal because they are currently in 4th place, but just something to consider. I think that, you know, comparatively to a lot of the teams around them, they are struggling a bit for talent. That's something to keep in mind. ThunderTalk at 9. And then we have a change for that final playoff spot. Unfortunately, in my power rankings, Invictus falls to number 11. WE gonna leapfrog them with their big win, their dominant win over them this week. WE looked fantastic. If they can keep this up, there is a real opportunity for them to be able to make playoffs over a team like Invictus, who has a pretty hard road ahead of them. So it's gonna be interesting to see what ends up happening there. Outside of that, LGD jumping all the way up to number 12. This team is actually playing pretty legit right now. Hopefully they can keep it up because they're a lot of fun to watch. They're going to be leapfrogging Rare Adam, who falls to 13, who has been on just an absolute travesty slide over the last few weeks. They're still talented, and Strive is by far the best player in this cluster of teams, but I would say 12 down feels pretty empty at this point. 11 up are really the only playoff teams that are left, but bottom of the standings shakes up a little bit. FPX jumping up to 14. AL gonna jump up to 15. I think they've been relatively competitive. Some of their players are playing well, which is not what I can say for the bottom 2 teams here at NIP, and Ultra Prime dropping down to that number 17. They just feel like the worst team in the league. Obviously, 14 to 17 are all kind of in the same range. It's all really just personal preference how you want to rank them, but that's how I personally rank them. But those are my power rankings. Time to talk about my player of the week and my dud of the week here for week 8. My player of the week is going to go to Aki on OMG. They just continue to rise up the standings. They are playing well above their level right now. Huge win streak, the second longest in the LPL, only behind EDG right now for OMG. Obviously, I'm not entirely sure if they're going to be able to keep it up, but Aki was awesome. And like I said, he's been criminally underrated as a jungler this year. One of the more impactful players towards his team's winning success chances in the LPL, period. End of story. The other player that I considered was JJ on EDG. They were both really good, but I ended up settling on Aki for OMG. Now, my dud of the week is going to go to Tion on Top Esports. He just has not been the same this year. Whatever mental funk he's gotten himself into, it is clearly affecting him. He's going for plays that aren't good. He's not really assisting Rookie in the mid lane, who is also struggling a bit. It just honestly feels like the team is worse off this week for having Tion in, and that's never a good sign for a reigning MVP, so definitely need to step that up. Other candidates for dud of the week, Leon on Rare Adam, Xiao Hao on Anyone's Legend, both having quite bad weeks, but I ended up settling on Tion for my week 8 dud of the week, and Aki for my week 8 player of the week. But that's gonna do it. I hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, again, let me know down in the comment section below. Who was your player of the week, dud of the week? How do you feel about my power rankings? Who's too high, who's too low? I love to hear you guys' thoughts and feedback. Of course, if you enjoyed the video, hit the like button. Not only does it let me know you're enjoying it, but it helps get this content out to more people, which is always super helpful for me. Of course, if you are new, hit that subscribe button. If you made it an hour, 2 hours, I should say, into an LPL recap, you're probably gonna like a lot of what I do on this channel, you know, for all 4 of the major regions, not only the LPL as well as the NACL. I do it every single week. Regular season, playoffs, off-season, everything. Your full LoL Esports coverage is on this channel, so hit subscribe if you haven't yet. But with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day, and I will see you all later.